was the kind of night where the wind whispered secrets through the trees, carrying the smell of damp earth and decay. The kind of night that felt alive in ways you couldn't explain. I had been driving down a back road in rural Pennsylvania, a route I'd taken 100 times before, but that night it felt different. Shadows moved just a little too fast, the darkness a little too thick. My headlights cut through the black, illuminating stretches of old farmland, abandoned barns, and dense patches of woods. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The road curved sharply, and I slowed, the tires crunching over gravel. That's when I saw it. An old pickup truck parked crookedly on the shoulder, headlights off, engine silent. A man was standing beside it, hunched over, facing the woods. Something about him felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it. He wasn't waving or signaling. He wasn't even moving much. Just standing there. I glanced at my rearview mirror, then back at him, and the hair on my arms stood up. He had no face. I swear, no face. Just a smooth, featureless expanse where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I slammed the accelerator. My car roared down the road, tires spinning on gravel as I tried to put distance between us. The thing didn't move. It didn't even turn to look at me. Just stood there. When I finally dared to look back, it was gone. My heart was hammering, my hands slick on the steering wheel. I told myself it was a trick of the headlights, a shadow, exhaustion. But deep down, I knew better. A few miles later, I reached a small, run-down gas station, the kind with flickering neon lights and a bell that rang every time the door opened. The attendant was a thin, pale man, his eyes sunken, staring through me. I asked if anyone had been out on the road, if anyone had needed help. He didn't answer at first, just shook his head slowly. Then he whispered, almost like a warning, "You shouldn't be out there tonight. Not after dark." I laughed nervously. "It's just a road," I said. "People drive it all the time." He shook his head again. "Not tonight. Not after what's been coming through." I paid for gas in silence, the feeling in my chest growing heavier. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling through dead leaves like whispered warnings. I didn't see the man from before, but I couldn't shake the image of that faceless thing standing in the shadows. When I got back in my car, I noticed the headlights were dimmer than usual, flickering. Odd. I adjusted the knob, but the light barely cut through the darkness. The road stretched ahead like a black river, and I had to keep moving. That's when I heard it, the scratching. Soft at first, almost like a branch scraping the side of the car, but then louder, sharper, closer. I slammed on the brakes. Nothing. I looked around. The trees on either side of the road were still. The shadows didn't move. But then I saw it. Marks on the pavement, deep scratches, dragging from the side of the road to the edge of the asphalt. And in those scratches, I saw footprints. Not human. Long, thin, with claws, dragging as if the creature was crawling. My stomach turned. My rational mind fought to explain it away. A raccoon, a deer, something ordinary. But the prints were too large, too long, and they didn't resemble any animal I knew. I drove faster, praying the road would end. And then I saw the lights. At first, I thought they were another car approaching fast. But there was no engine noise, no reflection on the pavement. Just lights, pale white, flickering like candles in the dark. They circled me, moving closer, impossible angles like they were everywhere at once. My vision blurred, the edges of reality shaking. I slammed the brakes again, my chest tight, and the lights vanished. I pulled over at the next turnout, desperate to calm down. My phone was dead, no signal. Nothing. I was truly alone. Then I heard the voice. Not a whisper, not a scream, but a calm, cold voice right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have come." I spun around. No one, but I could feel it, standing there, watching me. I started the car and floored it, tires squealing, adrenaline surging. The road twisted, the darkness pressing in from all sides, and then I saw the house. It was an old farmhouse, crumbling, paint peeling, lights flickering inside as if someone or something was moving around. I had no reason to stop. None. And yet I found myself pulling into the driveway, drawn to it by some force I couldn't resist. Inside, the house was empty. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs hung in corners, and the air smelled like rot and old wood. I called out, my voice shaking, but no one answered. Then I noticed the photographs. Framed pictures, all black and white, lined the walls. Families, smiling, ordinary, except their faces were scratched out. Scratched so violently it looked like someone had taken a knife to the glass. The scratching started again, this time from the second floor. Heart hammering, I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath me. At the top, a hallway stretched in front of me, doors ajar, darkness spilling out. The sound came from the far end, the last room. I pushed the door open, and my stomach dropped. The room was empty, except for a mirror on the wall, and in that mirror, I saw it. The faceless man from the road, standing behind me, taller, broader, its skin pale and stretching unnaturally over its bones. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My feet were frozen, my heart thudding like a drum. Then it moved, slowly, deliberately, reaching for me. I bolted down the stairs, tripping over the railing, scraping my knees, but I didn't stop. Out the door, into the night, into the wind, into the darkness that somehow seemed thicker now, alive. My car was gone, pulled into the driveway, replaced by the same faceless man standing there, smiling, or at least mimicking it. I ran into the woods, branches tearing at my clothes, roots threatening to trip me, but I couldn't stop. Behind me, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, following. Not running, not chasing, just following. I dared to glance back, and the world seemed wrong. Trees bent at impossible angles. Shadows moved against the laws of physics, stretching and reaching toward me. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near a creek, gasping for breath. That's when I saw them, hundreds of eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, watching me from the water, from the trees, from the shadows. They didn't blink, they didn't move, just stared. Then the faceless man appeared, not running, not walking, just there in front of me. The eyes in the woods began to multiply, crawling along the ground, climbing trees, filling the night. It leaned down, a hand on my shoulder, cold as death, and whispered, "You belong here now." I woke up the next morning on the side of the road, my clothes torn, dirt smeared across my face. The farmhouse was gone. The scratches on the pavement gone. The truck, the faceless man, all gone. My car was where I had parked it. Everything normal, too normal. But when I got home, I noticed the photos on my wall. Old family portraits I didn't remember taking, all the faces scratched out, and sometimes at night, when the wind howls and shadows twist just a little too fast, I see them. Watching me, waiting, and I know the faceless man is still out there somewhere following. No one believes me. Friends think it was a nightmare, some fevered hallucination. But I know better. I've seen what waits in the darkness, and I know one day it will find me again. Story the end. The wind was unrelenting that night, rattling the windows of the old farmhouse on the outskirts of Millfield, Ohio. The skeletal trees bent like desperate hands toward the blackened sky, casting grotesque shadows on the uneven dirt road that led to the house. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and old plaster. Emily Jennings had moved into the place only a week ago, seeking isolation and a reprieve from the noise of city life. She thought a quiet rural existence would soothe her frazzled nerves, but by the time the clock struck midnight, every instinct in her body screamed that she was not alone. The first sign came when she heard the floorboards creak softly above her bedroom. Emily's bedroom was on the second floor, with a slanted ceiling and a single window that framed the stormy night sky. She froze, heart hammering in her chest. She knew she lived alone. Her uncle had owned the place before passing last year, leaving it abandoned for months. She had spent the evening unpacking boxes of her belongings, ignoring the unease that seemed to creep in with the wind. At first, she told herself it was just the house settling. Old farmhouses were notorious for the way they groaned and sighed, especially during storms. But then she heard it again, a slow, deliberate drag across the floorboards. It wasn't random. It had purpose. It was moving toward her bedroom. Emily clutched the blanket around her shoulders and sat upright in bed, eyes wide in the dim glow of her bedside lamp. She strained to listen. The dragging stopped just outside her door. Her pulse raced as she forced herself to reach for the light switch. When the bulb flickered to life, the room was empty. Shaking, she laughed nervously at her own fear. "It's nothing," she whispered. "Old house, old noises." But the noises didn't stop. As she tried to settle back under the covers, a soft tapping began at the window. She held her breath, straining to see through the darkness. Rain lashed against the glass, and in the shifting shadows of the storm, she thought she saw a figure pressed against the pane. Heart leaping, she scrambled to the window. There was nothing there. No footprints, no silhouette, just the cold rain and the barren field beyond. That night, Sleep was impossible. Every gust of wind, every creak of the old timbers made her flinch. Around 3 a.m., when the storm had reached its peak, she heard it, the whispering, a faint, rasping voice, so soft it was almost drowned by the rain, coming from the hallway outside her bedroom. She sat up, frozen, trying to convince herself it was just the wind. But then she heard her name. Emily. It was drawn out like a sigh. Her stomach dropped and the blanket slipped from her shoulders. She wanted to scream but found her voice gone, strangled by fear. She tried the door, but it was locked. She always locked it at night. That was when she noticed the handle was turning on its own, slowly, deliberately. She backed away, her mind racing. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, hands trembling, and dialed 911. The line was dead. No dial tone, no static, nothing. The whisper came again, this time closer, almost beneath her window. Emily's eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for something, anything that could serve as a weapon. Her gaze landed on the baseball bat she had brought from home. She clutched it like a lifeline, listening. The whispering grew louder, and then she heard it, footsteps on the stairs. Not light, careful steps, but heavy, measured ones. Her chest tightened. Whoever, or whatever, was in the house, it wasn't human. Her rational mind screamed at her to run, but the house was surrounded by open fields, and the storm had washed away any hope of a quick escape. The steps reached the top of the stairs, and she could hear the slow creak of the banister as if someone or something was leaning on it. She gripped the bat tighter, her knuckles white, and then the whisper came again, right outside her door. Emily, come to me. The voice was unmistakable now. It was her uncle's voice, or at least it had been. She had visited him every summer as a child, and his deep, soft tones filled her memories. But this was wrong, corrupted, hollow. She felt bile rise in her throat. She swung the door open, bat raised, ready to strike. The hallway was empty. Nothing but shadows and the smell of damp earth that seemed to have seeped in from outside. Then from the corner of her eye she saw movement. A dark shape slipped across the hallway toward the stairs. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs bending at unnatural angles, moving in a jerky, disjointed fashion. Emily screamed and swung the bat, connecting with a wet, spongy resistance. The thing let out a gurgling noise, unlike any sound a human could make, and vanished into the darkness. She stumbled back into her bedroom, heart racing, and slammed the door. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, she couldn't tell. The storm had subsided, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. Emily stayed in the corner of her room, clutching the bat, listening. Silence. Too much silence. When she finally mustered the courage to leave her room, the house was different. The air was colder, heavier, as if the storm had left behind more than just wet wood and mud. The hallway was littered with objects that had not been there before. Old photographs, broken toys, and a small, dirt-streaked mirror leaning against the wall. She picked up the mirror, and her reflection stared back at her. But it wasn't her face. It was her uncle's, twisted and contorted, eyes black and void. The mirror fell from her hands, shattering on the floor. Emily backed away, tripping over the rug and falling onto the cold wooden floor. She scrambled to her feet and ran for the front door, but it was locked from the outside. Panic surged through her. She banged on the door, screaming for help, but the house seemed to swallow her cries. That's when she heard it again, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps behind her. She turned, bat raised, ready to fight. The figure that emerged from the shadows was tall and skeletal, wearing tattered remnants of clothing that had once belonged to her uncle. Its eyes were pits of darkness, and its mouth stretched into a grin that was both human and impossibly wrong. "Emily," it whispered, voice echoing like a distant memory. "Come with me." She ran. Down the hallway, down the stairs, through the kitchen, and into the back door. The night air hit her like a wall, cold and heavy. She ran across the wet field, feet sinking into the mud, until she reached the road. Her neighbor, a farmer named Tom, was sitting in his truck, headlights illuminating the driveway. She ran toward him, screaming, and he jumped out, pulling her inside the truck. I think there's someone in the house," she gasped, trembling. Tom frowned. "Emily, you live alone. The place has been empty for months. There's no one there." Her hands shook as she tried to explain, but he just looked at her with concern and confusion. Finally, she pointed back toward the farmhouse. Something's in there. It's not human." Tom followed her gaze. The house was dark, silent, completely normal in the soft glow of the truck's headlights. No signs of movement, no shadows, nothing. That night, Emily stayed with Tom. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. And when the morning came, she returned to her house, hoping the horrors of the night had been a fevered dream. The house looked the same as it always had. No broken mirror, no strange objects, no signs of anything unusual. But in the attic, she found something she hadn't seen before. A small, dusty box. Inside were dozens of photographs of her taken from outside the house over the past week. There were pictures of her unpacking, cooking, sleeping, even staring out her bedroom window. The last photograph was different. It showed her standing in the field, bat in hand, screaming at the farmhouse, and behind her in the shadows of the doorway was a figure she recognized all too well, her uncle, or what had once been him. Emily dropped the box and ran. She didn't stop until she reached the highway, hitching a ride into town. She never returned to Millfield. She never told anyone the full story, because who would believe her? People would say she'd imagined it, that the isolation and storm had gotten to her mind. But sometimes late at night, when she's alone in her apartment in the city, she feels it, that same cold presence, lingering at the edge of her vision, watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, she hears it whisper her name, calling her back. She never looks out the window, because she knows it's there. Waiting. Patient. Hungry. Story. The end. The rain had been falling for 6 days straight, an unbroken gray curtain that turned the sky into a lid and the world into a sealed jar. Even the locals in northern Vermont, people who prided themselves on tolerating miserable weather, started complaining at the gas station, muttering that the storm felt wrong, like it had settled in with a mind of its own. I didn't live there. I lived 2 states south, where my apartment overlooked a busy intersection, and the sound of traffic was my nightly lullaby. But my cousin Anna lived in that rainy, forgotten town, and she'd invited me up for a week. She'd just gotten out of a long, bad breakup, and though she didn't admit it outright, I could tell she didn't want to be alone. I should have gone earlier, before the storm took root, before the roads turned to mud and the power station started glitching at random, before that night. When I arrived, the town looked drenched to the bone. Every building seemed waterlogged, and the mountain slopes behind Anna's cabin were streaked with muddy runoff. The forests were heavy. I don't mean weighed down by water. I mean the atmosphere, the way the tree line felt like a wall pressed close behind her home, as if the woods were listening. Her cabin sat alone, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, on an unpaved road that twisted through dense evergreen forest. Even in daylight, the place felt isolated. By nightfall, it felt like an island carved out of something watching. Anna tried to play it cool when I came inside. She made jokes, unpacked wine glasses, turned on the tiny radio by the counter, but she was jumpy, constantly glancing at the windows when she thought I wasn't looking, double-checking the door locks, asking if I heard that sound. I didn't. Not yet. It wasn't until our second night that I learned what she meant. We were sitting at the small kitchen table, eating reheated chili and listening to the rain hammer the roof like relentless fingers. The power had already flickered twice. The highway into town had reportedly been closed due to a fallen tree and a landslide. We were cut off. Halfway through dinner, Anna went rigid. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. All I heard was the storm. "No?" I said. She stared past me toward the back door. "It's been happening for 3 nights now. Always after dark, always when the power flickers." I set my spoon down slowly. "What kind of sound?" She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward, speaking barely above a breath. "It's like someone whispering my name from the tree line." My skin tightened. I tried to rationalize it. The storm, the wind, the stress from her breakup. But her face wasn't the face of someone imagining things. She was pale, exhausted, hollowed out. The power flickered again, went out for 3 seconds, then came back on with a weak hum. And right at that moment, just as the house went quiet enough for the rain and wind to dominate the air, I heard something too, a faint, dragging sound on the back porch boards. Not footsteps, not wind, a slow scrape like fingertips dragging across old wood. The hairs on my arms rose. Anna grabbed my hand. "That's it." We sat silently listening. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Then, a whisper, right outside the back door. A voice that wasn't quite male or female, but human enough to freeze my blood. Anna! It wasn't a scream. Not even loud. Just a soft, intimate whisper meant for her ears alone. She flinched violently. It knows my name. I tightened my grip on her wrist. Don't move. We stayed perfectly still while the whisper came again, drawn out and wet sounding, as if spoken through a mouthful of rainwater. Anna, where are you? My stomach twisted. Something dragged itself across the porch again. Then the doorknob rattled, gently, experimentally, as though a hand, maybe not fully human, was testing how it worked. Anna's breathing went rapid. It's been doing that. It never tries too hard. Just tests. The knob stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then a single knock. Soft, rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. They weren't asking for entry. They were signaling. That night, neither of us slept. Every time the power flickered, the whisper returned, sometimes from the back porch, sometimes from the tree line, once directly under the bedroom window, always calling for her. By morning, it was gone. The daylight diluted whatever presence stalked the cabin. The forest looked plain, empty. But Anna and I were exhausted, shaking and pale. We drove into the small-town grocery store to tell the owner, an old guy named Ben, what had happened. When Anna mentioned the whisper, his face darkened. You shouldn't be staying out there in this storm, he muttered. Things come down from the mountains when the rains last this long. I waited for him to laugh, for him to reveal it was just some local legend. He didn't. What kind of things? I asked. He hesitated. Things that mimic, things that call out in familiar voices, things that learned how to speak by listening through the trees. My mouth went dry. Like coyotes? No, he said flatly. Not like anything you've ever seen. We tried to book a room at the small local inn, but they were full, cut-off travelers stranded by the storm. The cell service was down, the landlines glitched, we had no way to reach the outside world. We had to go back to the cabin. And that night, the worst of them all, everything escalated. The sky was almost black by 5 p.m. The rain fell harder, slamming the roof so loudly we could barely hear each other. The power died fully by sundown, and the forest fell silent. Not muted, silent, no rain in the trees, no wind, no animals, as if the woods were holding their breath. At 9:13 p.m. it started. Scrape, 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 but this time from the front porch, then from the back, 2 sets of drags, then a third, then a fourth. Anna grabbed my arm. It's multiplying. Whispers circled the house. Not just one voice, several. Some whispering her name, some whispering mine, some whispering words I didn't understand, wet, broken syllables that sounded like a language unraveling, then, faintly, a laugh. Not joyful, not mocking, just a sound of acknowledgement, like something out there now fully understood we were listening. Slow footsteps approached the front door. Then 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. We didn't move. Then a voice, my voice, said through the door, "Can you open it, please? I forgot my key." Anna's eyes widened in horror. "It sounds exactly like you," the voice repeated, perfectly mimicked, tone for tone. "Can you open it, please? I forgot my key." The doorknob twisted sharply. Anna whimpered. I grabbed her hand. Then the back door rattled violently as something large shoved against it. The wood bowed inward. A whisper seeped through the cracks like fog. "Let us in." I don't know where the courage came from, but I ran to the fireplace, grabbed the metal poker, and held it like a weapon. Anna grabbed a knife from the kitchen. Something slammed into the back door again. Harder. The wood splintered. We backed toward the hallway, whispering to each other to stay calm, to stay quiet. Then every window in the house went completely black. Not dim, not shadowed. Black, as if something enormous had covered every window at once. Then came the sound that haunts me more than anything. Dozens of fingers tapping lightly on the glass. Tap, 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 all around us. A surround sound nightmare. Anna screamed. The moment she did, all tapping stopped instantly. And the whispers began again, furious, excited. Anna, we hear you." Something scraped down the length of the hallway wall. Something else climbed onto the roof, heavy enough to make dust fall from the beams. The house moaned under the weight. Then, from directly outside the bedroom door at the end of the hall, a whisper in my dead grandmother's voice. The exact voice, the exact intonation. "Sweetheart, open the door. It's safe." My throat closed. My eyes burned. Anna shook her head violently. "Don't listen. They know." Then the whisper changed into my voice again. "Open the door, please. It's safe." Then my father's voice. Then Anna's voice. Then dozens of voices, overlapping, twisting together like wet roots. This wasn't mimicry anymore. It was hunting. The door to the back porch burst inward. The house filled with cold, wet air. Wind howled inside, though outside the trees were still dead silent. Dark shapes moved in the entryway. Tall, wrongly tall, too thin. Their joints bent too far in the wrong directions, their heads tilted like broken deer. Their skin was a pale gray, stretched too tight. Their mouths were too wide, their movements too jerky. One of them stepped forward, its neck cracking, and whispered in a voice that sounded like Anna, "Come with us." We ran. We ran into the only place with a lock that hadn't broken yet, the tiny pantry off the kitchen. We shut the door, bolted the latch, shoved crates against it. Inside the darkness, we held our breath, listening to the house break around us. Heavy footsteps, wet dragging, laughter. Something sniffed outside the pantry. Then a voice whispered through the door, a voice perfectly identical to mine. "Found you." The door handle twisted, slowly, then violently. The wood cracked. Anna cried into her sleeve, trying to stay quiet. I held the poker up like it would do anything. Then a sound, not from them, from outside. Sirens. Multiple. Getting closer, fast. The creatures stopped, every one of them. Total silence. Then, like a stampede, they fled, crashing through walls, through windows, out into the forest, vanishing so fast it was like they dissolved into the rain. When the police arrived, the house was wrecked. The doors shattered, the windows broken, muddy footprints everywhere, footprints far too long and narrow to be human. But the officers refused to stay more than 10 minutes. They refused to check the woods. They refused to comment on the footprints. They just told us to pack a bag and follow them into town. We never went back. The cabin was condemned, later torn down. Anna moved to Arizona. I moved back home. But sometimes, when the rain falls hard enough to drown out the city noise, my power flickers. The walls go quiet, and I hear it again, scrape, 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 followed by a whisper outside my high-rise apartment door. In my own voice, "Can you open it?" Story the end. It was just past midnight when the first tremors of unease hit me. I was driving along Route 84, the stretch that ran between small Pennsylvania towns, so tightly packed with trees that even in daylight it felt like you were barreling through a tunnel of shadows. The rain had started an hour earlier, a cold November drizzle that turned into sheets of water, blurring my windshield. Streetlights were rare, and the ones I did pass flickered weakly, as if struggling against the wind. I had been on the road for nearly 2 hours, heading back from a late shift in Harrisburg to my apartment outside Carlisle. I wasn't worried about the weather. I'd driven in worse. But the highway had been empty for miles, and that emptiness always plays tricks on the mind. The rhythmic swoosh of the wipers, the flash of headlights cutting through the rain, the occasional reflection in a puddle. Everything seemed off. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, drenched and leaning against the guardrail. But as I slowed, squinting through the rain, I realized the figure wasn't moving like a normal person. It stood perfectly still, almost unnaturally, the rain sliding down its clothes like water off waxed fabric. Its head was tilted slightly forward, and I couldn't make out a face. Something inside me told me to keep driving, to ignore it. And I did, at least at first. My eyes kept darting to the side mirror, expecting it to disappear. But it didn't. Miles passed, and every time I glanced back through the rear view, the figure was there, standing closer to the road, always at the edge of the reflection. My heartbeat started to spike. I slowed even more, fogging up the inside of the windshield as I breathed heavily. And then, almost simultaneously, my car radio crackled with static. The voice that came through was faint at first, like someone trying to talk from the other side of a tunnel. "Don't. Stop." I froze. The figure in the mirror had shifted slightly. One arm was lifted, pointing toward me. The other, it hung at a crooked angle, the elbow bent wrong, the hand twitching. I shook my head, blaming sleep deprivation. But then my headlights caught it, full on. Its face was wrong. One eye seemed normal, the other bulging unnaturally, skin stretched tight and glistening wet. The mouth was half open, showing teeth that were too long, too thin, and oddly yellowed. I hit the gas. The rain intensified, hammering the car like fists. The wipers couldn't keep up. I could barely see the road. And through the storm, I could swear I heard the voice again. "Don't. Leave." I glanced in the mirror once more. The figure was now running alongside the car, not walking, not jogging, running on long, jerky legs that bent wrong at the knees. Every so often, its body twisted in a way that seemed physically impossible. Its arm shot out and grazed the side of the car. I screamed and slammed the wheel, swerving into the next lane, praying no other vehicle was coming. The rain-slicked asphalt betrayed me, and the car fishtailed. My tires screamed as I fought to regain control, and then it was gone. The road stretched empty ahead. The rearview mirror reflected only the dark highway behind me, flickering trees, and nothing else. My hands were shaking, and sweat poured down my face despite the cold. I pulled off at the next rest stop, the car still trembling under my grip on the wheel. I sat there, chest heaving, staring out into the black woods. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and that's when I saw the footprints. They weren't human, not exactly. Each step was elongated, the prints uneven, like someone or something had a broken gait, and they didn't stop at the edge of the parking lot. They continued into the dark woods toward the highway I had just left. I wanted to leave, to get back on the road and drive as far as I could without stopping. But something held me there, a curiosity I couldn't explain. Slowly, I stepped out of the car, mud sucking at my boots, and followed the prints a few feet into the woods. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic, almost like blood mixed with rust. The prints led to a clearing. The trees arched overhead, forming a tunnel of darkness. And in the center, I saw it. The figure, standing perfectly still, rain dripping off its twisted body, one arm bent in the wrong direction, the other twitching. Its face, oh God, its face was grotesque. The bulging eye seemed to roll independently, tracking me. Its mouth opened slightly, and a guttural hiss came out, like air being forced through a cracked pipe. It stepped forward, and I realized it wasn't walking, it was gliding, but the way it moved made no sense. Limbs bent where they shouldn't, body contorting and stretching like a nightmare. I stumbled backward. My phone slipped from my hand. It was dead. No signal, no flashlight, nothing. The creature tilted its head. You came. Back. I didn't answer. I ran. Mud and leaves tore at my clothes. The rain mixed with my tears. I could hear it behind me, moving impossibly fast, the wet crunch of its feet on the forest floor echoing like gunshots. I didn't stop until I reached the highway again. My car sat where I had left it, untouched. I jumped in, slammed the door, and didn't look back. I floored it, tires skidding, water spraying up in sheets. The rearview mirror reflected only darkness. For the next several weeks, I stayed home. I didn't drive after dark. I avoided the woods, but I kept thinking about it. And then came the sounds at night. A slow tapping at the window, rustling near the back door, soft scraping along the siding like claws being dragged. At first, I told myself it was the wind, or a raccoon, or my imagination. But one night, I woke to the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing in the hallway outside my bedroom door. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed. The breathing stopped. A shadow moved across the wall, long and distorted. Then a tap at the glass, tap, tap, tap. I didn't sleep that night. I haven't really slept much since. Sometimes when I drive at night, even on well-lit streets in the city, I see it in my rear view. Always just a glimpse. Always at the edge of the reflection. Watching. Waiting. I don't know if it follows everyone or just people who've seen it. I only know that when it shows up, it doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't hurry. It just waits. And it always catches up. I've tried to move, to start fresh somewhere else, but the tapping follows me in my dreams. The figure waits at the edge of every mirror, every darkened alley, every rainy night. And I know eventually I'll hear it whisper my name. The first time, it was outside in the storm. The second time, it was inside my own house. I fear the third time will be the last. Story, the end. The rain had started again just after midnight, soft at first, then thick enough to blur the streetlights along Highway 62. I was driving home from a shift at the mill, the road nearly empty, save for the occasional deer that darted across the slick asphalt. The night had a strange quiet to it, like the world was holding its breath. I passed the abandoned gas station on the corner of Mill Creek Road. Its neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering yellow and red. Something or someone stood by the edge of the woods beyond the gravel lot. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, a person soaked through and shivering. But when I slowed down, I saw there was something wrong about the way it moved. It was a man, or at least human-shaped, but his limbs were too long, too thin. His head tilted unnaturally as he followed me with empty, dark eyes. I blinked, thinking maybe the reflection of my headlights was tricking me, but then he lifted a hand slowly, beckoning me. I tried to ignore it and kept driving. The rain pounded harder against the windshield, but every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him. Always there, stepping silently, gliding more than walking, keeping pace with my truck. My hands started shaking on the wheel. I wanted to scream, to accelerate, but my foot felt like it was stuck to the pedal. The man or creature never ran. It just followed, like it had all the time in the world. 20 minutes down the road, I noticed another figure emerge from the shadows, a young woman, soaked, with hair plastered to her face. She staggered toward the roadside and then froze when she saw me. Her eyes were wide, terrified. I stopped. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. She shook her head violently. "Don't stop. Don't look back. It follows." Before I could ask what she meant, the thing from the gas station stepped closer to the edge of the road. Its eyes were empty, but I felt its gaze pierce right through the cab. I swallowed hard. "Get in!" I yelled at the woman. She ran without hesitation and threw herself into the passenger seat, drenched and shivering. I slammed the door, started the truck, and floored it. The dragging sound started behind us almost immediately. Not the sound of tires on wet asphalt. Something wet and heavy being pulled, slow and deliberate. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. There it was. Not running, not chasing, just gliding. Its head tilted as it stared into the cab, its limbs bent at impossible angles, and then impossibly another shape appeared behind it. And another. The woman buried her face in her hands, whispering, "It doesn't tire, it doesn't forget, it never stops." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They come for the people who see them, at night, alone. They follow you until the night ends. Or you don't." The road twisted and turned through the thick woods. I could hear the dragging behind us getting closer, closer, even though nothing seemed to get nearer. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the rain. Suddenly, the truck headlights flickered. I slammed both hands on the wheel, trying to keep control. That's when I noticed the woman wasn't in her seat anymore. Her empty side of the truck was blurred, like she had vanished. I screamed. The dashboard lights went out. Only the faint reflection of the rain on the windshield remained. The dragging sound was right there, beneath the truck. The air went cold, unnatural, biting through my clothes, into my bones. Then I saw it in the faint glow of the headlights. Right there in front of the truck. Its face, if you could call it that, shifted constantly, like wet clay. Eyes formed and disappeared. Mouths appeared, opened, and whispered my name. I hit the brakes, but the truck slid across the slick road. It didn't move away. It didn't need to. Somehow it was inside my head, pressing, whispering, bending reality. My vision swirled. I slammed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, the road was empty. The woman sat beside me, drenched, shaking, staring forward. The dragging sound had vanished. The night was quiet, too quiet. I dropped her off at her house a few miles later. She didn't say goodbye, just disappeared into the darkness of her porch, still soaked. I drove home, checking the mirrors constantly, expecting to see those shapes following me. I got home, locked every door, turned on every light, sat in my truck until the sun came up. But even in daylight, I could feel it. Watching, waiting. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees, beyond the road, beyond the shadows, it waits. The next night, when the lights went out in my house for just a moment, I saw something in the corner of the living room. Tall, wrong, fluid, shifting, and it smiled. I haven't slept properly since. Story the end. The first time I heard the story, it was told in a bar off Route 14, just outside Wickenburg, Arizona. I'd stopped for a late dinner during a long drive back from Nevada. The man who told it, skinny, nervous, with the kind of face that suggested he hadn't slept in days, leaned across the counter and said, "If you're driving tonight, don't take the old Peralta Road." I hadn't asked him anything. I just ordered chili and a coffee. But he said it anyway, like he had to get it out before it poisoned him. He said his name was Ron. He looked mid-40s, but might have been younger, hard to tell under the exhaustion that clung to him like desert dust. He started talking like someone opening a wound that had been festering for years. And this is what he told me. He'd been a municipal electrician for the small town of Rancho Arroyo, a desert town with a population barely touching 3,000. He liked the quiet, the lack of traffic, and the simple jobs. He'd been there almost 8 years, and the routine suited him just fine. But routine is fragile, easily shattered. One night, about 2 years ago, he was called out for a malfunctioning streetlight on Old Peralta Road, a long, lonely stretch of cracked asphalt that cut through the desert before dead-ending at the abandoned Hawkins mine. The mine had been closed since the early 70s after a collapse killed several workers. People said the ground out there was unstable, cursed, or both. Teenagers dared each other to go out there, but the town council never got around to fencing it off completely. They just pretended it didn't exist. The call came in at 11:18 p.m. He remembered the exact time because he'd been half asleep on the couch, rewatching an old Western he'd seen 100 times. He didn't want to go. Night work on isolated roads wasn't unusual, but something felt off. Still, a job was a job. He loaded his truck and headed out. When he reached Old Peralta, he saw the defective light immediately. It was flickering hard, flashing white-yellow bursts across the empty desert. The wind blew grit against his truck windows like soft tapping fingers. He parked, climbed out, and felt a chill. Not normal for the Arizona night. The temperature had dropped sharply. He told himself the desert could do strange things after dark, though he'd lived there long enough to know the chill wasn't natural. As he approached the pole, he noticed something else. There were footprints near the base of the light. Bare feet, small, maybe a child's, but the spacing was strange. Too far apart for a child's natural stride, like someone had been taking long, loping steps. The sand around them hadn't been disturbed by wind, as if they had been made minutes before he arrived. His stomach tightened. He shined his flashlight around but saw nothing beyond desert shrubs and darkness. He told himself maybe some kids had messed with the pole. Kids did stupid stuff like that. He got to work. He climbed the ladder, opened the access panel, and checked the wiring. Everything looked normal. No chew marks from animals, no shorts, no burnt connections. But as he leaned in closer, he noticed something thin, dark, and stringy lodged near the wiring. At first he thought it was plant matter, maybe a bit of dried tumbleweed. But it wasn't. It was hair. Long, tangled strands of jet black hair caught deep inside the fixture, wrapped tightly around the wiring like it had grown there. He dropped the panel door and swore. Suddenly, he didn't want to be up that pole anymore. He came down the ladder fast, scanning the desert again. Nothing moved, not even the wind. He checked the footprints again. More had appeared, many more. They now circled the pole in a loose ring, bare, child-sized prints in the sand. They hadn't been there when he went up the ladder. He was sure of it. He backed up toward his truck, one slow step at a time. Then he heard something. A voice. A small voice. "Help me." He froze. The voice was soft, thin, almost a whisper. It came from behind the light pole, in the darkness just beyond his flashlight's reach. "Hello?" he called out, his throat tight. "Are you hurt?" No answer. He took one step forward and lifted the flashlight. That was when he saw her. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, standing just at the edge of the light. Her hair was long, tangled, black as tar, hanging over most of her face. She wore a faded white nightgown that fluttered slightly in the still air. Her feet were bare and dusty. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice cracking. The girl didn't speak. She just stared at him through the strands of her hair. Then she stepped back into the darkness. He hesitated only a moment before chasing after her. Kid in the desert at midnight? He couldn't just leave her there. He sprinted around the pole, flashlight beams sweeping across rock and sand. She was gone. The desert stretched empty in every direction. He spun in a full circle, heart pounding. There was nowhere she could have run to, nowhere to hide for at least a quarter mile. But there was something new on the ground, more footprints. Dozens, maybe hundreds, small, bare, leading away from him. Not in a straight line, in spirals. Uneven spirals that wound deeper toward the desert, converging toward the direction of the abandoned Hawkins mine. He returned to his truck, locked the doors, and called the sheriff's department. They said they'd send someone out, but it would take time. Ran him through the usual questions. Had he been drinking? Was he sure he didn't see an animal? That sort of thing. He waited in his truck, engine running, lights on. Then the flickering light above him went out completely with a loud pop. Darkness swallowed the road. He turned on his high beams, and that was when he saw them. Children. Dozens of them. Standing on the road, maybe 20 yards away. All of them barefoot. All of them small. all of them still as stone. Their bodies were silhouetted against the beams, heads tilted downward, hair covering their faces. Their small, thin arms hung limp at their sides. He blinked hard. They were gone. Every one of them. He slammed the truck in reverse, spun around, and tore off down the road, dust flying. He didn't stop until he reached the sheriff's substation. He was shaking so badly he could barely speak. A deputy went with him to check the road. Nothing was there. No footprints, no hair, no malfunctioning light. Everything worked perfectly. They told him he'd probably had a waking dream, or a heat hallucination, or stress. Anything but the truth. He tried to believe them. He tried for months, but he couldn't, because each night after that, every time he closed his eyes, he saw their silhouettes lined up in the road, still and quiet and watching. And some nights, he said, he'd wake up to hear small bare feet pattering across his trailer floor, even though he lived alone. That was the story he told me. I figured it was just a drunken man trying to spook a stranger. But when I left the bar, it was after midnight, and my GPS, despite being perfectly charged, refused to load any route except one, Old Peralta Road. I tried shutting it off, restarting it, nothing. The screen kept flashing the same message, fastest route available. I drove anyway. Not on Peralta, I took the longer highway south instead. It added 40 minutes to my trip, but I didn't care. Still, as I passed the turnoff to Old Peralta, I slowed down, just enough to glance down the dark road. At first, I saw nothing. Then the streetlight flickered. Once, twice. And for a split second in the white burst of that failing bulb, I saw what looked like small silhouettes standing along the road. When the light steadied, they were gone. I told myself it was imagination, a trick of the eye, a story stuck in my head. I drove home fast. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 months later, I passed through the area again for work. I stopped at the same bar, mostly out of curiosity. The bartender recognized me. "You looking for that guy you talked to last time?" she asked. I nodded. She looked uneasy. "He's dead." My stomach dropped. She said they found Ron's trailer door wide open one morning. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, nothing broken. Just bare, dusty footprints all over the floor. Small ones, a lot of them, leading from the doorway to the middle of the room, then stopping, as if whoever made them simply vanished. Ron was never found, and the sheriff's department didn't bother with an investigation longer than 2 days. The case file was 1 page long. They chalked it up to him running off, maybe heading to Mexico. But the bartender whispered something else. He told me he heard them. The kids said they were getting closer, said sooner or later they were going to take him back. Back where? No one could say. But every local knows this. No one goes down Old Peralta Road alone after dark. Not anymore. And on some nights, especially moonless ones, drivers swear they still see those small silhouettes standing in the road, heads bowed, waiting for someone foolish enough to stop. I've never gone back to check. I don't plan to. And if you ever find yourself near Rancho Arroyo, if your GPS ever tries to send you down Old Peralta Road after midnight, there's one thing you need to do. Ignore it, no matter how persistent it gets, no matter how much it insists, because once you see the children, they don't forget you. And someday, eventually, they come looking. Story the end. The first time I drove through Granger Hollow, I barely noticed the town existed. A faded gas station, a shuttered diner, a crooked wooden sign with the town's name peeling off in sun-bleached curls, that was it. A place people passed through on their way to somewhere else. But the second time, I didn't pass through. I stayed. I didn't want to. But something in that town decided I would. It started with a late-night shift at the regional newspaper I worked for in Flagstaff. My editor sent me out to interview a retired forest ranger in Granger Hollow who claimed he'd seen something unnatural in the woods, his words. Most rangers saw strange lights, weird animal behavior, odd silhouettes, nothing newspaper-worthy. But the man's voice on the phone had a strangled urgency that crawled under my skin. I drove out that evening, thinking it'd be a quick interview. The drive to Granger Hollow took 3 hours through pine forests and winding mountain roads. By the time I reached the outskirts, it was almost 11:30 p.m. The town looked like it had gone to bed 50 years ago. The streetlights flickered with a dull amber glow. The houses were old, real old, weathered boards and sagging porches, frames creaking like arthritic bones. The ranger, a man named Hal Benton, lived in a rust-eaten trailer on the far end of Sycamore Lane. I expected a paranoid type, someone babbling about aliens or government experiments. But when Hal opened the door, he didn't look unstable. He looked terrified. He motioned me in without a word. His living room smelled like old pine, spilled coffee, and fear. He handed me a stack of maps, hand-drawn sketches of the surrounding woods, covered in circles and scribbled notes. Dates, times, places. "Something's wrong in those trees," Hal said. His voice cracked like dry bark. "I don't just mean weird. I mean wrong." "What exactly did you see?" I asked. He swallowed hard, eyes drifting toward the dark window, like he expected something to be staring in. "At first," he said, "I thought I was seeing an injured animal, but it wasn't walking right, wasn't shaped right, and it didn't act afraid of people." He leaned in close, and when it looked at me, it changed. I frowned. "Changed how?" Hal didn't answer. He just stood abruptly and shut off every light in the trailer. We stood in pitch darkness. Not even the moon got through the trees here. "Look," he whispered. He parted the dusty blinds a fraction of an inch. "Tell me what you see." At first, I saw nothing except the tree line beyond the trailer. But then my eyes adjusted. There was something moving between the trunks. Not walking. Not running. Crawling. Its shape was hard to define, like it kept shifting, limbs bending where limbs shouldn't bend. A pale mass sliding low to the ground. Every few seconds it would stop, jitter unnaturally, then continue its slow, deliberate advance. "What the hell is that?" I breathed. Hal let the blinds fall shut. "That thing comes back every night," he whispered. "Gets closer each time. It mimics sounds, mimics voices. Last night," he paused. "Last night it mimicked me." A chill rolled down my spine. "And you called me here why?" I asked. "Because I can't leave," he said, voice trembling. "When I try, it appears in the road, blocking the way, waiting. And it's not just one anymore." As if summoned by his words, a soft scratching sound came from outside the trailer. Long, slow, deliberate scraping, like claws dragging across the metal siding. Hal stiffened. "They know your car's here," he whispered. "You brought them something new." I'd had enough. I gathered my notebook, thanked Hal for his time, and headed for the door. I wasn't staying another second in that trailer. Hal grabbed my arm before I could turn the knob. "If you leave now," he said, "you won't make it to the highway." I pulled away and stepped outside. The night was colder than before. Too cold for spring. The air felt heavy, dense, like something was pressing down on the entire town. I hurried to my car and started the engine. Headlights flared. The road back to the highway stretched out in front of me, dark, empty, lined with pines. I drove. Fast. I didn't look back at the trailer, but I didn't have to. Something stepped into the road ahead. I hit the brakes so hard my seatbelt dug into my ribs. At first I thought it was a deer, but then it stood upright. A shape taller than a man, limbs too long, joints all wrong. Its skin was pale, stretched thin over a too narrow frame. Its head hung limply, neck bending at a disturbing angle, hair long and matted like dead vines. And then it lifted its face. I will never forget that face. It wasn't human. It wanted to look human, but it wasn't. The eyes were too wide, the mouth too long, like a child drawing a person without understanding anatomy. And then it spoke. Not a growl, not a screech. A voice. My voice. "Help me." My foot hit the accelerator. I swerved around it and sped down the road, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw it lurch into a run, fast, impossibly fast, keeping pace with my car for a horrifying stretch before peeling off into the forest, disappearing between the trees. I didn't slow down until I hit the main highway, and I didn't stop driving until I reached my apartment at dawn. I called my editor immediately and told him I was done with the assignment. He didn't argue, probably assumed Hal was a crazy old man and I had let myself get spooked. I didn't care. I just wanted the night behind me. But the night wasn't done with me. For 2 days, everything was fine. I went to work. I slept fitfully. I avoided thinking about what I'd seen. On the third night, around 2 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Half asleep, I answered. Static filled the line. Then, "Help me," my own voice. I hung up immediately. The next morning, I found dirt on my windowsill. Pine needles. Something that looked like dried mud smeared across the glass as though fingers had dragged down the surface. And that night, as I lay in bed, I heard something outside. A scraping sound. Long, slow, deliberate, like claws on glass. I didn't look. I couldn't. But the next morning I found footprints in the patch of soil below my window, human-shaped, but too long, too flat, like the creature had tried to copy a human footprint but hadn't gotten it quite right. For weeks it kept coming back. Some nights I heard it, some nights I saw its silhouette outside, some nights it whispered in my voice, or my mother's, or Hal's. Yes, Hal. Because one morning I checked the local news and saw a headline, "Former Ranger Found Dead in Granger Hollow." The photo showed Hal's trailer. The article said he had been found just outside the tree line, mutilated, bones bent in unnatural directions, skin torn in long strips like something had peeled him apart. The sheriff said it was a bear attack. I knew better. The night after Hal's death, the creature came closer than it ever had. I woke to a soft tapping, not on the window, on the inside of my bedroom wall. It tapped 3 times, paused, then tapped again, mimicking the sound of knuckles knocking on wood. My breath froze in my chest. Then I heard it whisper, "Open, door." Not my voice, not completely. It was learning, trying to sound human, trying to sound like someone I would trust. I didn't sleep the rest of the night or the night after. For the next month, I lived in constant dread. Every sunset felt like a countdown. Every shadow felt like it was watching. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed everything I owned and moved across the country, far from forests, far from mountains, far from Granger Hollow, and for a while things were quiet. But last night, as I walked up to my new apartment building after a late shift, I saw something across the street. A shape. Tall, thin, pale, standing perfectly still beneath the street lamp. Its head tilted at a broken angle, its arms hanging too long, its hair brushing its knees, and when I froze, staring, it reached up one hand, a hand with too many joints, too many bending angles, and it waved. In my voice from across the empty street it whispered, "Help, me." I ran inside, locked every door, every window, but just before sunrise I heard it again, the tapping, 3 slow knocks on my apartment door, followed by, "Open, door." I don't know how long I can stay ahead of it. I don't know if it follows by scent or memory or some sick tether it formed the night I entered Granger Hollow. But I know this. It learns. It mimics, it gets closer, and it never stops. If you ever see a town called Granger Hollow, if you ever hear a voice in the woods that sounds like someone you know, do not answer, do not look, do not speak, do not stay. Because once that thing notices you, once it knows your voice, once it decides you belong to it, it will follow you, and it will find you. Story the end. The first thing I heard that night was the wind beating against the side of the house, the way it sometimes did when storms rolled through from the west, rattling the loose siding and making the gutters creak like something was climbing along the roofline. I was used to November storms. They were part of growing up in the rural edges of Pennsylvania, but something about this one felt off from the start. The air had a strange density to it earlier in the evening, like a pressure change that made everything feel heavier. Even the dogs had been unnervingly quiet, which wasn't normal for them. I had driven up that evening to my parents' old place in the woods outside Bellevue, a tiny town with only one gas station and a bar that shut down early in the winter months. The house had been mine since my parents passed, but I rarely stayed there anymore. The place was too big, too remote, too full of old memories that didn't always sit right. Still, I came back now and then to check on it, especially when the cold season began to creep in. Pipes burst easily if no one kept heat going, and I didn't have the money to repair another catastrophe. I settled in just before dusk, lit the old wood stove, and sat on the sagging couch in the living room with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The storm warnings had been all over the radio. Gale force winds. Expect power outages. Stay indoors. The usual winter talk, which most locals ignored. Around 9, the power flickered once, twice, and then died entirely. Everything fell into a suffocating sort of darkness, the kind you only get miles away from town. The fire cast a dim orange glow that reached only as far as the hallway. I remember thinking I should check the breaker box outside, but between the rain pounding like small fists on the windows and the wind that seemed determined to rip the shutters from the frame, I stayed where I was. Power outages in that house usually resolved themselves within a couple of hours. But then the knocking started. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the back door. Not loud, not frantic, but steady. Human. Intentional. I sat up straight, the blanket slipping off my shoulders. It was pouring outside. No one should have been on the property, not at this hour, not in this weather, and especially not walking through the woods to the back door. I waited, telling myself it was just a loose branch blown against the house, or maybe an animal knocking something around in the yard. But the sound came again. Same rhythm, same pressure. Tap, tap, tap. Short pauses between each one, like someone knocking with a single finger. I got up slowly and walked toward the kitchen, which felt darker than it should have been. The windows rattled with every gust of wind, and the shadows cast by the fire behind me stretched long across the floorboards, warping in strange ways as I moved. The back door had a small window at the top, but the porch light was out, leaving nothing but blackness beyond it. I stood a few feet away from the door, forcing my breathing to stay quiet. The knocking didn't come again. For a moment, I convinced myself it had been my imagination, amplified by the storm and the loneliness of the house. I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled, leaning on the counter. That's when the doorknob shifted. A tiny metallic click as it turned, slowly, deliberately, like someone outside was testing whether it was locked. It twisted just enough to squeal. I nearly froze where I stood. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I took 3 steps back before I even realized I was moving. The knob stayed turned for a second too long, then released with another faint click. Whoever or whatever was outside didn't try again. I hurried back to the living room, grabbed the metal fireplace poker, and stood near the stove, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't have cell service out here, not during storms. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't leave. The truck wouldn't make it down the muddy driveway, not in those conditions. My only option was to wait out the night. But the house had other ideas. A little after 10, the wind shifted direction. Instead of battering the south side, it hit the front, hard enough to make the windows shudder. The trees groaned outside, bending dangerously, and every now and then something slammed against the siding. The house felt alive with noise, too alive. Then I heard footsteps, not outside, inside, upstairs, slow, heavy, carefully placed. My blood went cold. I knew I had locked every door when I arrived. I had double-checked. Habit drilled into me from the days when my parents used to warn me about trespassers, hunters who sometimes wandered too close, or strangers passing through looking for easy targets. No one should have been inside. I held the poker tighter and stepped into the hallway. The house smelled faintly of wet wood and something else, something metallic, like old pennies. The staircase loomed ahead of me, swallowed by darkness. The footsteps continued, moving across the upstairs hallway, right over the guest bedroom. Then they stopped directly above where I was standing. I didn't breathe. The floorboards creaked softly, as though whoever stood there had shifted their weight. I stepped back, unwilling to stand directly beneath whatever was up there. Silence stretched through the house, interrupted only by the storm's angry roar. I needed a weapon better than the poker, something more substantial. My father's old shotgun was still locked in the cabinet in the upstairs office, but going up there felt insane. I couldn't even see the stairs properly. I didn't know what waited in the darkness above. I stepped backward until I reached the living room again, and just as I did, the footsteps started descending. One step, then another, slow, heavy, deliberate. I gripped the poker so tightly my knuckles ached. The figure didn't hurry, didn't hide its presence. It simply walked toward me with a steady, measured pace that made my stomach twist. When the footsteps reached the bottom step, they stopped. The house settled into an oppressive quiet. I stood perfectly still, staring into the dark. The fire cast faint light into the hallway, but it wasn't enough to reveal anything. Then a voice spoke, soft, strained, barely above a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here." It came from the bottom of the stairs. A male voice. Not familiar. Not young, not old, somewhere in between. I couldn't see him, but he was standing just beyond the edge of the firelight. I swallowed hard. "This is my house," I managed, my voice shaking despite every effort to keep it steady. "Who the hell are you?" The figure shifted slightly, and I heard the faint scrape of something metallic on the floor. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "Not tonight." I took one small step backward, keeping the poker raised. The man didn't advance. "Listen," I said, trying to sound firm. "The storm's bad. If you need help..." He cut me off sharply. "Help isn't coming." The storm raged harder outside, almost as if punctuating his words. The house groaned under the pressure of the wind. I squinted, trying to make out his shape. The faint outline of a man was visible, tall, shoulders slightly slumped, clothes soaked as though he'd come in from the rain. "How did you get in?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the light, just enough for me to see his face, or at least what was left of it. The left side looked normal, if pale and tense. The right side was wrong. The skin was pulled tight, discolored, almost melted looking, like it had been severely burned long ago but never healed right. His eye on that side was clouded, barely open, the eyelids scarred and twisted. My breath caught in my throat. He stared at me with the one good eye. "You should have stayed away." I lifted the poker slightly. "What do you want?" He didn't blink. "I'm trying to keep you alive." A cold chill went down my spine. "By breaking into my house? You're not listening." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with frustration. "It's coming. It followed me. I thought I lost it in the creek, but it never loses its trail. Never." I glanced toward the back door, the knob turning, the knocking. "What followed you?" I asked cautiously. He opened his mouth to speak, but at that exact moment, something slammed against the outside wall near the kitchen, hard enough to make the dishes in the cupboards rattle. The man's ruined eye twitched. Too late. Before I could respond, the window above the sink exploded inward with a deafening crash. Glass flew across the floor, carried by a gust of freezing wind that blew out half the fire in the stove, and something entered the house. Not a person, not an animal. Something I had never seen before, something that moved with a disturbing combination of speed and jerking stiffness, like its limbs didn't bend the right way. I saw only flashes of it between the flickering shadows. Elongated limbs, a hunched posture, joints that seemed too loose, too fluid. Its skin, or whatever it had, looked pale and slick in the firelight. The man pushed me back, shouting, "Get behind something!" The creature let out a sound, an awful, wet, clicking noise that reverberated down my spine. It crouched near the broken window, its head angled unnaturally to one side, as though it were listening to the vibrations of the room rather than looking around. The man grabbed a chair and hurled it toward the thing. The creature leapt sideways with bone-cracking speed, then sprang forward. Before I could react, it was on him. The man screamed, just once, before the thing dragged him into the kitchen, slamming him against the counter with a sickening crunch. I stumbled backward, the poker shaking in my grip. His voice, barely alive, shrieked, "Run!" But I didn't. I couldn't. My legs refused to respond. The creature's body convulsed with strange, twitching motions as it pressed against him. I couldn't see exactly what it was doing, but the wet, tearing sounds made bile rise in my throat. The man's screams died quickly. Too quickly. The creature shifted again, then turned its head toward me. Both of its eyes, if you could call them that, twitched independently, unfocused, like it was smelling the air rather than seeing me. It took one halting step forward, then another. Its limbs bent at odd angles, its spine arching unnaturally high. I stumbled backward toward the living room, trying to keep my shaking hands steady. The firelight flickered. The entire house seemed to pulse with shadows. The creature lunged. I swung the poker with every ounce of strength I had, feeling it connect with something soft yet solid. The thing screeched, a shrill, inhuman sound that made my vision blur. I didn't wait. I bolted toward the stairs. I didn't know why. Instinct, panic, desperation. But I knew I couldn't stay in that room. Behind me, I heard it scrambling across the floor. Too fast. Too many limbs. I reached the stairs and took them two at a time, not caring if I fell. At the top, I darted into the office, slammed the door, and threw my weight against it. My shoulder throbbed from the impact. The shotgun, the cabinet. My hands fumbled with the keys hanging on the wall. I could hear the creature climbing the stairs, its movements stuttered and uneven, like multiple things crawling at once. I got the key into the lock, yanked the cabinet open, and grabbed the shotgun and a box of shells. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Silence. Then a slow drag of claws across the wood. I loaded around, hands shaking uncontrollably. The doorknob turned, not like the hesitant turn at the back door earlier, but fast, forceful. When it didn't open, the creature pressed against the wood, testing its strength. The hinges groaned. I backed away, raising the gun. The door cracked down the center. One sharp hit, then another. On the third, it splintered. The creature poured into the room, not walked, not crawled. It poured. Its limbs bent and folded in impossible ways as it emerged through the broken doorway. It shrieked the moment it saw me, or scented me. I fired. The blast lit up the room. The creature jerked backward, slamming into the wall. But it wasn't dead. It wasn't even slowed much. It started toward me again, dragging itself with one arm while the others flailed, reaching. I backed into the corner, pumping another shell into the chamber. My ears rang. My breath tore from my lungs. The creature lunged. I fired again, this time aiming for the center of its twisted torso. The blast tore through it, sending parts of it splattering across the floor. The creature spasmed, screeching so loudly I thought the windows would burst. Then it collapsed. I didn't move for a long time, not until the storm outside finally softened into a gentle hiss of rain, not until the house settled into its familiar old creaks. When I finally stepped forward, shotgun ready, the creature's body looked wrong. The pieces of it were shriveling, darkening like decaying fruit. The flesh, or whatever passed for flesh, curled inward, collapsing in on itself. Within minutes, it was nothing but a black, brittle husk. By morning, it had turned to dust. The man in the kitchen hadn't been so lucky. I couldn't look at what was left of him for long. The police came hours later when the phone lines finally returned. They didn't believe my story, not fully, but they couldn't explain the damage either. They told me maybe it was a wild animal, maybe a bear, but bears don't move like that. Bears don't know how to knock. Bears don't follow people through the woods. I left the house that same day and never returned for more than a few minutes at a time. I couldn't stay after what had happened. I've never seen that creature again. But some nights when the wind hits the house at just the right angle, when the shadows stretch long across the ground, when the trees bend and the world falls uncomfortably silent, I hear knocking. Soft, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Story the end. The night I decided to take the detour through Caldwell Ridge was the night everything in my life split cleanly into before and after. Before I was a normal guy, delivery driver for a mid-sized furniture company, long hours, a beat-up Ford van, and little patience for GPS glitches. After, I've never slept through a full night again. I don't close my curtains, I don't take back roads, and I don't, under any circumstances, drive after midnight. This is what happened. I'd been finishing a long delivery route through southern Kentucky, heading toward Nashville to crash at my cousin's place for the night. It was already after 11 p.m. when I passed the green reflective sign, Caldwell Ridge, 7 miles Falls Pass, closed for construction. The detour sign pointed away from the highway, directing drivers onto a narrow 2-lane road that wound upward into Black Hills. My GPS updated instantly. Fastest route, 18 minutes saved. Good enough for me. I turned left. The pavement changed almost immediately, rougher, cracked, edges crumbling into gravel. My headlights carved through thick woods, branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers. The houses I passed were few and far between, each one dark, silent, swallowed by the forest. I tried to shake the tension creeping up my back. I'd driven isolated routes before. Rural Kentucky wasn't exactly crawling with activity at night. But something about that road felt dead, not quiet, dead. Dead. Even the trees seemed to lean inward, as if listening. I chalked it up to exhaustion, cranked the radio, and drove on. Around 15 minutes later, I saw the first sign of trouble, a pale white shape on the right shoulder. Deer, I assumed. I slowed a little, but it wasn't a deer. It was a woman, standing perfectly still, facing the woods. Her clothes, what I could see of them, were dark, maybe black, blending with the tree line. Her bare feet were planted in the dirt. Long, dark hair hung straight down her back, unmoving even though the night breeze tugged at my van. I rolled down my window. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there like she'd grown out of the soil. Something instinctual told me not to get out of the van. I pulled away slowly, watching her fade into the trees in my mirror. I told myself she was probably just lost, or drunk, or sleepwalking. Normal explanations, anything but the feeling gnawing at my gut. A mile later, my GPS dinged and instructed me to turn left onto a road I swear wasn't there a second earlier. The sign was handmade, just a slab of wood nailed to a post, Hollow Creek RD. The road was a single lane and dipped sharply downward, swallowed by trees. I hesitated. My GPS insisted. Fastest route. I turned. Immediately I regretted it. Not 10 seconds in, the radio cut out. Static flooded the speakers, but then silence. My phone lost its signal. The van's interior lights flickered, then steadied. The air grew colder. I mean physically, sharply colder, as if I'd crossed some invisible threshold. I wiped the fog forming on the windshield, shivered, and kept driving. The trees pressed closer, branches scraping lightly against the metal roof of the van. The road bent sharply, forcing me to slow to almost a crawl. Then, something crossed the road. Fast. Too fast to make out clearly. A pale blur. Low to the ground. I jolted the wheel, but kept control. What the hell was that? Probably a fox, I told myself, but foxes don't run like that, not on two legs. I rounded another bend and saw something ahead. A car. Abandoned. Right in the middle of the road. Its headlights were off. One door hung wide open. The frame was dented, as if something had slammed into it hard. I slowed to a stop behind it. My headlights illuminated the interior. Empty. No luggage. No sign of struggle. No blood. But there were footprints. Bare footprints. Leading from the driver's side door into the woods. Small footprints. Child-sized. My stomach dropped. Every instinct I had screamed to turn around. I threw the van in reverse, but the engine sputtered violently. Then died. The headlights winked out. The dashboard went black. Complete darkness swallowed me. For a long second, I sat frozen, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles cracked. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not one pair. Several. Light. Deliberate. Walking on the asphalt just behind the van. I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then something dragged lightly across the back doors of the van. Not claws, not metals, fingers, slow, scraping fingers. My chest tightened. I didn't dare turn around. Whatever was outside started whispering. Not words, not language. A soft, broken mimicry of human sound, almost like children humming out of tune. The hair on my arms stood up, then it stopped. For a moment, everything was silent again. I reached for my phone. Dead. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Another whisper came, but this time, it spoke my name. A child's voice, right outside the driver's window. I didn't wait. I didn't look. I shoved my shoulder against the door, flung myself out, and sprinted into the woods. Stupid? Yes. But staying in that van was not an option. The cold air punched into my lungs as I ran blindly through branches, roots, and thorns. Something moved behind me. Several somethings. Fast, light, tireless. Their footsteps crunched the leaves in a rhythm that made my blood drop to my feet. I didn't look back. Ahead, through the trees, I saw light, the faint glow of a house. I barreled toward it, tripping twice, scraping my palms on the forest floor. I burst from the tree line and staggered up the yard toward a small wooden home with a single porch light. I pounded on the door. Please, someone, let me in. A moment passed, then the door creaked open an inch. An elderly woman stared at me through the crack, one eye milky white, the other sharp as a hawk. You were on Hollow Creek, she said flatly. I nodded frantically. My van, things, people or something were out there. Please. She opened the door wider. Get inside, now. I stumbled into her living room. She shut the door, bolted it, then dragged a heavy wooden beam across 3 metal brackets mounted to the wall. Sit, she ordered, pointing to a worn love seat. I collapsed onto it, chest heaving. What the hell is out there? I gasped. She didn't answer. She walked to the window, pulled the curtains tight, and turned off every light except a small lantern. Only then did she speak. You saw the children. I froze. Children? I repeated. She nodded slowly. That's what they used to be. My skin crawled. Used to be? Her voice was barely a whisper. They're not alive, not anymore. Haven't been for nearly 50 years. I stared at her. She went on. In 72, a school bus went off one of the ridge roads, slid down an embankment and crashed into the creek. Every child on board drowned before help came. 12 of them. Their bodies were recovered, but not all of them. My mouth went dry. So what are they now? She looked toward the boarded door. They're hungry. A heavy silence filled the room. Why did they come after me? I whispered. They go after anyone who enters their road, she said. Hollow Creek is theirs now. Should have been blocked off years ago, but the town council didn't want the bad history scaring property buyers. I swallowed hard. Can they get in here? Not tonight, she said. Not while I'm alive. Something in her voice chilled me deeper than the night outside. Why tonight specifically? I asked. She didn't respond. She simply stared at the lantern flame like she was counting seconds. Then I heard it, a small noise, from outside, a soft giggle, right by the window. Something brushed the house siding. Then the porch steps creaked. Slowly, deliberately. They were here. The old woman stood and lifted the lantern. "You need to leave through the back," she said. "Follow the creek downstream until you hit the highway. Do not look behind you, so do not stop, no matter what you hear." "What about you?" I asked. She smiled, sad and resigned. "They only need one tonight." My blood turned to ice. Before I could argue, she shoved me toward the back door, unlatched it, and whispered, "Run." I obeyed. I plunged into the cold night, following the faint sound of water rushing over rocks. Behind me from the house, I heard small voices, laughing, whispering, overlapping, climbing over each other in eerie, childlike tones. Then I heard the woman scream. Once. Just once. I didn't turn around. I didn't slow down. I didn't breathe properly until I stumbled, soaked and shaking, onto the shoulder of the highway at dawn, where a passing truck driver pulled over and called for help. By the time police reached the house, there was nothing left. Not of her. Not of the creatures. Just the empty house and tiny bare footprints circling it in the dirt. They never found my van. Never found the abandoned car either, but sometimes when I drive late at night, if I absolutely have to, I see something on the side of the road in my headlights. A small barefoot shape, standing perfectly still, facing the trees, waiting. I floor the gas every time, because I know what happens if I stop, and because once you've seen the children of Hollow Creek, they don't forget you. Ever. Story the end. Cold air pressed against the windows of the small rental cabin as the last stretch of dusk bled out across the Michigan tree line. I'd taken the place for a weekend, just 3 nights, because I thought isolation would help me finish a proposal for work. That was the truth I gave my coworkers. The truth I didn't say out loud was that I'd been struggling to sleep for months, waking up at the same time every night, 3:17 a.m., with the same image stuck to my mind. The silhouette of a man standing perfectly still at the foot of my bed. I had no idea what the silhouette meant, or why it always appeared after those strange sounds I kept hearing in my apartment. The soft dragging across the hallway carpet, the nearly inaudible whisper near my ear just before waking, the cold spots in the middle of summer. My rational brain kept insisting it was stress, bad sleep, maybe even sleep paralysis. But something deeper told me the opposite. Something visceral, something primal. So I left Detroit behind for a while. I wanted distance, quiet, rest. The cabin sat near a narrow gravel road that bent through a thick patch of woods, miles from town. I didn't know much about the place beyond the listing photos. Dim rooms, rustic wooden beams, a fireplace, and a porch that looked like it wanted to collapse. The owner, a woman in her late 60s named Linda, had left the key under a chipped ceramic gnome as promised. She'd given me a tight, oddly sympathetic smile when I arrived, as if she knew something I didn't, or as if she understood something I wasn't prepared to admit. Inside the cabin felt smaller than in the pictures. Old, a little crooked, but clean enough. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and took in the scent. Pine, old wood, a faint hint of cigarette smoke embedded in the walls from some previous tenant. Night came quickly. I cooked a small dinner, poured a whiskey, and opened my laptop. I typed maybe 3 sentences before realizing I was rereading each one a dozen times, unable to focus. My attention kept drifting to the windows, the way the black outside pressed against the glass like something alive, watching. By midnight, the cabin had gone still. The kind of stillness that isn't peaceful but hollow. I checked the time, 12:03 a.m. 2 more hours before the witching hour, I muttered, half joking. Writing wasn't happening. My eyelids felt heavy. The bed was calling. The bedroom was small, just enough for the bed, a nightstand and a narrow dresser with a warped mirror. I left a single lamp on, dim but comforting. Detroit had taught me never to sleep in total darkness. I crawled into bed, pulled the blanket over myself, and listened to the old building settle. Pops, creaks, whispers of wind against the siding. At some point, sleep took me, and then, like always, something woke me. Not a nightmare. Not a dream. A sound. A scrape. Long, slow, deliberate. My eyes shot open. In the dim yellow glow of the lamp, the shadows looked stretched, wrong, as if someone had tugged at them. My heart pounded. I turned my head, scanning the room. No one was there. The sound came again. Scrape. This time I realized it wasn't inside the room. It came from the hallway. I held my breath. The cabin was completely still for a long moment, long enough that I wondered if I'd imagined it. Then footsteps. Soft. Bare. Moving just beyond the bedroom door, a chill rippled down my spine. The door was slightly ajar. I'd left it that way. And in the small gap where the darkness of the hallway met the dim light from my lamp, something moved. A shadow, a shape, a figure. Someone was standing there. I couldn't see a face, only height, shoulders, the outline of a man's head unmoving, framed in the doorway crack. My whole body froze. It felt like my bloodstream turned to ice. The figure did not move. It only stood there, perfectly still, a human shape that shouldn't be in my cabin. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Then, as quietly as it had appeared, the shadow pulled away from the crack in the door and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. I wanted to scream, or leap out of the bed, or hide under the blanket like a child. But I couldn't force my limbs to move. After what felt like forever, I finally swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My breath shook. I grabbed the lamp, holding it like a weapon, and stepped toward the door. I whispered a shaky warning into the silence. Who's there? Nothing. I pushed the door open slowly. The hallway stretched ahead of me. Dark, empty. I flicked on the living room light. Nothing there either. The front door was still locked. The windows were latched. I checked every corner, every closet, even under the bed like a scared kid. No one. But I hadn't imagined it. I knew I hadn't. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I sat on the couch, lamp beside me, every muscle tensed. The silence grew heavier, more suffocating. At 3:17 a.m., the exact time I always woke in Detroit, the cabin's temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath fogged in front of me. But nothing else happened. By dawn, I'd convinced myself it had to be stress, some strange half-dream, maybe sleep paralysis, but while awake. I decided to stay another night anyway, like an idiot. The second day passed quietly, too quietly. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place. I went for a short walk along the gravel road just to break the oppressive silence. No other houses, no passing cars, only trees, dense and dark, hugging the road like they wanted to swallow it whole. When Linda drove by in her rusted pickup that afternoon, she slowed, rolled down the window, and studied me through the open cab. "Everything all right out here?" she asked. Her tone wasn't casual. It was searching, worried. "Yeah," I lied. "Just settling in." She nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "You hear anything strange last night?" My stomach tightened. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, then said, "Cabin's old. Wood shifts. Animals scratch around sometimes. Sounds worse at night." It felt like she was reciting a line she'd prepared before seeing me. I forced a laugh. "Nothing I couldn't handle." She dipped her chin in a slow nod, then drove off without another word. That should have been enough to make me leave, but I didn't. I stayed. That night I left the hallway light on. I told myself it was for practical reasons, but it wasn't. I wanted to see whatever might be standing there. Hours passed. Midnight. 1 a.m. 2. The cabin's silence thickened again, pressing against my ears. At 3:12 a.m., I began to doze. At 3:17 a.m., the footsteps came back. But this time they weren't soft. They were purposeful, slow, heavy. They echoed through the floorboards. The bedroom door creaked. I sat up sharply, heart hammering so fast I couldn't swallow. The light in the hallway flickered once, twice, then died. Pure darkness flooded the narrow hallway. I felt something move in that darkness. Felt it the way you feel someone standing behind you, even when you can't see them. A breath, not mine, pushed into the room. I fumbled for the lamp switch, fingers trembling so violently I slapped the table instead. Then the unmistakable sound of knuckles dragging down the wooden doorframe filled the room. I found the lamp switch. The light blazed on. The doorway was empty, but the wood showed fresh scratch marks, deep, vertical, as though nails had dug into it. I bolted from the bed, grabbed my keys, and ran out of the cabin wearing only socks and a flannel shirt. I didn't care. I ran until my lungs burned, past the road's curve, until I saw headlights coming toward me. It was Linda. She braked hard, rolled down the window, and stared at me in disbelief. "What were you doing outside at this hour?" she demanded. "There's someone in the cabin," I gasped. "Someone's been watching me, standing in the doorway at night." Her eyes darkened. She didn't act surprised. She acted resigned. "Get in," she said quietly. "Now." I climbed into the truck. She locked the doors. And then, without turning the truck around to head toward town, she drove deeper into the woods. I gripped the handle. "What are you doing? Take me out of here." She shook her head down at the steering wheel. "You don't understand. If you saw him once, he won't stop now." My stomach twisted. Saw who? She didn't answer at first. When she did, her voice broke. I should never have rented that place to you. The headlights carved through the woods as the truck moved down a path I didn't even know existed. Branches scraped the sides like skeletal hands. What's going on? I demanded. She wiped her face. People think the cabin's haunted. They think it's the land, but it's not. It's a man, or what's left of one. My blood chilled. She continued, back in the 60s, a hermit lived in those woods, barely talked to anyone. Folks said he had a temper, that he heard voices. One winter, he went missing for weeks. A group of hunters eventually found what was left of him, half frozen, half eaten. No one knows how he survived as long as he did out there. They brought the body back, but by morning it was gone. I stared at her, speechless. After that, she said, people started seeing someone standing at the end of their beds, hearing footsteps in the night, scratches on the walls. Always at 3:17 a.m., no one knew why. No one stayed in that cabin longer than a night or two. They all said the same things you did. The truck hit a pothole, but she didn't slow down. He doesn't like visitors, she whispered. He follows them after they leave, watches them for months, sometimes years, waiting for the moment they're alone. I felt nauseous. So why didn't you tell me? She broke down crying. Because the land's been in my family for decades. It's all I have. If people stopped renting it, I'd lose everything. My breath shook with anger and terror. So what now? Why bring me deeper into the woods? She didn't answer. Her hands trembled against the steering wheel. Linda, I said louder, why are we going deeper in? Then, bang. Something slammed into the side of the truck. Hard. The whole vehicle jolted sideways. Linda slammed the brakes. We skidded to a stop. Silence. Then, bang. The driver's side dented inward as though something enormous had struck it with bare hands. Linda screamed. I saw the metal bend, warp. Something scraped along the truck door, slow and deliberate, like a single finger trailing along the metal. Don't move, Linda whispered, tears streaming. He's curious when you run. The truck's windows fogged on the outside, as if something was breathing against them. A shape appeared in the haze. A silhouette, not fully human. Tall. Bent slightly forward, its neck crooked at an unnatural angle, like it had suffered frostbite long ago and never healed right. The face pressed to the glass wasn't a face at all, just a massive shadow with two pale impressions where eyes should have been. It stared at me through the fog. My heart nearly stopped. Then a hand, long skeletal, slid down the window. The glass began to crack. Linda shoved the truck back into gear. Hold on. The wheels spun violently in the mud, then caught. The truck shot forward, branches whipping across the windshield. The silhouette vanished from the window. But I heard it, running alongside us. Fast. Too fast. The truck hit the main road moments later. Linda floored it. The speedometer climbed past 70, 80, 90. Finally, after nearly 10 minutes of breakneck driving, she slowed just enough to stay on the road. Her breathing was ragged. Mine was too. We didn't speak the rest of the drive. She took me all the way into town, right to the steps of the only motel. She insisted I stay there, not return to Detroit yet. He'll be looking for you, she said. He follows the ones who notice him, the ones who see him clearly. I wanted to ask how long, how far, but she didn't wait for questions. She drove off without another word. Inside the motel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking uncontrollably. The room was too quiet, too dim. Shadows collected in the corners like spilled ink. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. The motel owner tried to convince me to stay longer, but I needed to get home. I needed to leave that town, that state, that memory behind. But the moment I stepped back into my apartment in Detroit, the air felt wrong. Thick. Cold. I unpacked nothing. I paced the floor. Every creak of the building made my heart pound. At 3:17 a.m. that first night back, I sat awake, staring at the bedroom doorway. I refused to blink, but nothing happened. The next night, same thing. On the third night, exhaustion won. I closed my eyes. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of something dragging across my hallway floor. Slow, heavy. Stopping right outside my bedroom door, I froze. The doorknob turned. Twice. Very gently. Then a whisper seeped through the crack in the door. Not a word. Just breath. Cold. Hungry. Waiting. I haven't opened the door yet. I don't know if I ever will, because whatever stands on the other side isn't going away. It followed me home, and now that I've seen it clearly, it wants to be seen again. Story the end. From the moment I parked my truck at the far end of the gravel pull-off, the woods felt wrong. It was the kind of wrong you don't recognize until you're already in it, like stepping into a room where a fight just happened, the air still buzzing with leftover fury. I told myself it was only the wind, only the cold, only my nerves after driving 8 hours straight from South Carolina into the dark folds of rural Tennessee. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to go into those trees, not at night, not alone. But that night, I didn't have a choice. My younger brother, Evan, had been missing for 3 days. The sheriff's office had searched, volunteers had searched, even a drone team from Nashville had flown over the park. No trace. Not of him, his campsite, or his gear. It was like he'd stepped off the face of the earth, except his car was still there, parked neatly at the trailhead, keys gone, doors locked from the outside. I tried to tell myself that maybe he'd gotten lost. Maybe he'd taken a wrong trail. Maybe he'd fallen, broken his leg, been unable to crawl back out. But deep down, where instinct curls its sharp fingers around the truth, I already knew that wasn't it. Evan grew up in woods like these. Our dad raised us on hunting, camping, tracking deer prints through mud, and learning to spot a copperhead by its pattern before stepping too close. Even when we were kids, Evan could navigate a forest better than anyone I knew. He didn't get lost. Something else happened. And tonight, I was going to find out what. I grabbed my flashlight from the passenger seat, along with the map of Big Ridge National Park and the old compass that had once belonged to our dad. I paused long enough to tuck my phone into my jacket pocket, though I knew it was useless this deep in the Appalachian foothills. No service, no signal, no lifeline. The woods swallowed me within 20 steps. The air grew colder, and the sky, already moonless, darkened into a black so complete it felt like a lid being screwed down over the world. My boots crunched on dead leaves, each step sounding too loud in the hush. The beam of my flashlight cut a narrow path through the dark, thick with fog rising from the forest floor. I told myself to breathe. You know these woods. You grew up in places like this. There's nothing here that you haven't seen before. But that wasn't true. I'd never been in woods that felt like they were listening. After about 15 minutes of hiking, I reached the spot where the rangers said they'd last seen signs of my brother's tracks. They'd found partial prints in soft mud, treads matching his boots, distance between them suggesting a normal stride. No sign of panic, no sign of being chased. But the prints stopped abruptly past a fallen hemlock, as if he'd simply walked into thin air. My light skimmed the ground. The mud was still disturbed, though rain 2 nights earlier had softened the edges. I crouched down, fingertips brushing the indentations. Even after all the searchers who'd come through, I knew which ones were his. I remembered the nick in the tread from when he'd stepped on a piece of rebar as a teenager. The little flaw was still there. I followed the prints past the hemlock, tracing them with the flashlight, and then they stopped. Completely. The mud ahead was smooth, undisturbed, like no one had walked there in a year. I straightened slowly, my breath fogged in front of me. When I exhaled again, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. My breath hung in the air far too long, drifting like smoke that didn't want to disappear. The forest temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees, maybe more. Behind me, somewhere deeper in the dark, something snapped. Every muscle in my body locked. I waited, listened. Another snap. Closer. A third, closer still. Then the forest went silent again. I turned in a slow circle, sweeping my light across the trees. Nothing. No animals, no movement, no raccoons or deer darting between the trunks. The woods weren't alive. They felt abandoned, left behind, devoured. I forced myself to keep moving, tracing the area where the tracks ended, looking for new markings. Anything. Broken twigs, scraped bark, disturbed leaves. Something to show where Evan had gone. A few feet beyond the clean patch of mud, I spotted a faint line carved into the earth. Not a footprint, not an animal track. A drag mark. Like something heavy had been pulled across the ground. The line snaked deeper into the woods, wavering slightly, as if whatever had been dragged had shifted or resisted. My chest tightened. I lifted the flashlight beam and followed the line with my eyes. There, barely visible, was another mark. Another drag. 2 parallel trails now, leading somewhere. I swallowed hard and followed. The deeper I went, the colder it grew. The temperature didn't feel natural anymore. It felt deliberate, like the chill you only feel in old houses where no one has lived for decades. My breath puffed in front of me with every exhale. My fingers, even inside gloves, began to throb from the cold. Soon the drag marks ended at the base of a cluster of massive oaks. At first I didn't understand. Then the flashlight beam shifted, and I saw a shape lying between the roots. My throat closed. It was a tent. Evan's tent. Collapsed, partially buried under wet leaves and dirt, one pole snapped, the nylon ripped in long gashes. His backpack sat slumped beside it, torn open, contents dumped and scattered. A flashlight lay smashed nearby, his water bottle was split. His jacket shredded as if dragged by barbed wire. I stepped closer, heart hammering. "Evan?" I whispered, even though I already knew he wasn't here. The cold deepened. My breath fogged thicker, swirling instead of drifting. The leaves around the tent were frosted white, glittering under my light. I crouched and touched one. Ice. Actual ice. In Tennessee. In mid-June. My heart thudded painfully. I lifted the flap of the tent and shone my light inside. Nothing. No body. No blood. But the inside was colder still. So cold the fabric crackled when I touched it, stiffened by a thin sheet of frost. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. My mind scrambled for explanations, but none made sense. Hypothermia didn't create drag marks. Broken gear didn't appear from nothing. Frost didn't form in perfect circles around abandoned tents. A faint sound reached me. At first I thought it was wind, but it wasn't. It came from deeper in the trees. A low, wavering hum. No. Not a hum, a voice stretched thin, frayed at the edges. My name, whispered, so faintly I almost didn't hear it. "Ben," I froze. The sound drifted again. Impossible. It sounded like Evan, but wrong somehow, as if someone were imitating him through a hollow tube. I stood slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Evan?" I whispered. The voice came again, now farther left, deeper in the woods. "Ben? Help." My instincts screamed. Something was wrong. This wasn't how a lost person called out. This wasn't desperation. It was mimicry. I turned off my flashlight and instantly regretted it. The dark that swallowed me wasn't natural. It pressed in from every direction. Heavy. Suffocating. My chest constricted. My ears rang. The forest wasn't simply dark. It was empty. A void wearing the shape of trees. I fumbled the flashlight back on with shaking fingers. The beam flickered before stabilizing. The voice drifted again, now farther behind me. "Help, Ben." I didn't move. Couldn't. Something shifted between the trees, barely more than a shadow blending into darker shadow. My light caught the barest hint of movement, a slow, deliberate shape. Watching me. Not approaching. Waiting. Then, too quickly to react, it moved. Not toward me, but out of sight. Silently. No snapped twig this time, no rustled leaves. It simply slipped away. Everything inside me screamed to run. But another part, fear's quieter sibling, dread, knew that running blindly through the woods at night would get me killed faster than whatever was out there. So instead, I whispered, very softly, "What do you want?" The forest answered with silence so deep it vibrated. Then, "Ben." But this time, the voice came from right behind me. I spun, flashlight blindingly bright, but nothing was there, only trees. Ghostly pale trunks gleaming under the beam. I staggered back, breath catching. I needed to leave. Now, I needed to get out of the woods, call the sheriff, tell them what I'd found. But as I turned to go back the way I came, my flashlight flickered again and went out. Not dimmed, not died. Snuffed. The blackness swallowed me again, complete and instant, as if someone had dropped a curtain over the world. I slapped the flashlight, hit it, twisted it, nothing. Then I heard movement. Not footsteps. Not an animal. Something dragging lightly across the ground, kept circling me. Slowly. Deliberately. My breath caught in my throat. I reached into my pocket for my phone, desperate for any kind of light. I unlocked it blindly. The screen's glow weak and small compared to the dark. But it was enough. Enough to show the trees. Enough to see my own shaking hands. Enough to reveal the prints on the ground. Not footprints, not drag marks. Something else. Large, deep, clawed. The impressions formed a rough circle around where I stood. Like something had been pacing here, wearing a path in the ground, over and over and over again, waiting. The phone vibrated suddenly, a notification. My screen lit up with a text. "Unknown number, Ben. Stop." I stared at the message, heart pounding. The text wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that I had no service, not even one bar. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Turn around. Slowly. My throat tightened. My fingers shook violently. Another message. Unknown number. Don't run. Another. Unknown number. It can see movement. My pulse hammered so loudly I thought the thing, whatever it was, would hear it. I forced myself to turn. Slowly. So slowly it felt like moving underwater. My phone's dim glow illuminated the trees. And something else. A shape stood about 30 feet away. Too tall to be human. Too thin to be an animal. It stood perfectly still, limbs wrong, elongated, head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if studying me. My breath froze in my chest. The shape didn't move. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Don't make a sound. The creature shifted slightly, just a twitch of its head, as if reacting to the vibration. Another text popped in. Unknown number. It knows you're here. Another. But it doesn't know where. If you stay silent... The messages stopped abruptly. Then the screen went black. Dead. Something crackled from the creature. Not quite a sound. More like a glitch in reality. Then, very slowly, it lifted one long arm and pointed at me. I didn't think. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket. Roots grabbed at my boots. The forest blurred into streaks of black and gray. Behind me, I heard movement. Silent but fast. Too fast. Something gliding just beyond my light, just out of reach. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. Didn't breathe, except in desperate gasps. I didn't even know if I was running in the right direction. Then, up ahead, I saw lights. Dim. Flickering orange. Campfires, human voices, shouting. I burst into a clearing filled with search volunteers. They spun toward me. Flashlights raised, faces shocked. Someone grabbed my arm to steady me. Another held a radio. They asked what happened. If I was hurt, if I'd found anything. I couldn't answer at first. Could barely speak at all. My voice came in gasps. There's something, I managed. Something in the woods. It's not human. It mimics voices. It dragged something. My brother's, his camp. Frost. There was Frost. The volunteers exchanged looks I recognized, fear barely masked as skepticism. One of them, a middle-aged man with a ranger badge, stepped forward. Show me. I led them back into the woods, heart pounding the whole way. But when we reached the spot where Evan's tent had been, it was gone. No tent, no bag, no Frost, no drag marks, no tracks, nothing. Only an undisturbed patch of forest floor, leaves untouched. Every trace of what I'd seen had vanished. The ranger laid a hand on my shoulder gently. You're exhausted, he said. Cold. Probably dehydrated. These woods play tricks on people at night. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he believe me, but my throat felt raw, bruised by panic. Eventually they guided me back to the trailhead and insisted I rest in my truck until morning. I nodded numbly, climbed inside, and locked the doors. But I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Because as I sat there in the stillness of the early morning, something tapped lightly on the back window. I froze. Another tap. And then, from the woods, my brother's voice drifted out. Soft. Broken. Begging. Ben, help. But this time it didn't sound far away. It sounded like it was standing right behind my truck. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Hours passed before the sun finally rose. When the morning light hit the woods, the tapping stopped. But on the back glass of my truck, faintly fogged into the dew, were fingerprints. Too large to be Evan's. Too long. Too thin. They were pressed there deliberately, as if letting me know it had found me, and it could find me again. The search for my brother continued for weeks, but nothing was ever found. Not his pack, not his tent, not his clothes, not his body. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the dark settles thick around the house, I hear my phone vibrate on the table. No number, no caller ID, only a message. Always the same words. Ben, help. Sometimes I think about answering, but I know better now, because whatever is out there, it isn't my brother. Story the end. The night had been quiet for hours, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and fills every shadow with a subtle weight. Emily and her boyfriend Josh were driving back from a late-night diner on the outskirts of rural Vermont, a place where the woods pressed close to the road and streetlights were few and far between. The radio played soft, classic rock, but even that couldn't fully mask the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the tires on the asphalt. They had decided to take the old Mill Road shortcut to get home faster. It was the kind of road locals whispered about, lined with gnarled trees whose branches formed unnatural arches over the cracked pavement. Feels like a horror movie setting, Josh said, his grin trying to mask the unease he felt. Emily laughed nervously, but the joke didn't land the same way it would have during the day. About 15 minutes into the drive, the headlights caught something on the side of the road, a figure standing motionless, pale under the faint glow. Emily tensed. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Josh slowed the car. "Probably just some kid hitchhiking or someone waiting for help," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The figure didn't move as they passed, just stared with something unsettling in its posture, like it was unnervingly aware of them. They continued down the road, but a sense of unease settled in the car. The trees seemed to lean closer, their twisted silhouettes swaying in the wind even though it was a calm night. A mile down the road, the engine sputtered, then died. The headlights flickered and went out. Josh tried turning the key again, but the car remained silent. Panic prickled at Emily's skin. Josh grabbed his phone. "No signal," he muttered. The cell bars were empty. The silence outside became oppressive. The only sounds the distant rustle of leaves and a faint snapping of branches. They were miles from the nearest house, and something about the woods made them feel small, trapped. "We'll just have to wait for someone," Josh said, trying to steady his voice. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. Emily followed him out of the car. The air was cold, carrying an earthy smell mixed with something metallic. Blood, maybe, she thought, but hoped she was imagining. As they stood there, the woods seemed to grow darker, deeper, almost swallowing the dim light of the flashlight. Then they heard it, a whisper, soft, unintelligible, coming from the trees, moving with no pattern. Emily froze. "Josh, did you hear that?" The whispering intensified, as if circling them. Then there was a crack directly behind Josh. He swung the flashlight but saw nothing. The hairs on the back of Emily's neck stood on end. Suddenly, movement exploded from the shadows. Figures darted between the trees. Thin, unnaturally tall, their limbs bending at angles that shouldn't have been possible. Eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Josh screamed and grabbed Emily, pulling her back toward the car. The figures vanished before they could fully see them, but the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, as if the trees themselves were speaking in voices that scraped against the sanity. Josh managed to get the car doors open, and they climbed in, locking them immediately. They tried the ignition again. The engine roared to life on the third attempt, and Josh floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as they sped down the road. Behind them, the rustling of branches seemed to chase the car, though no headlights or figures were visible. After what felt like hours, they reached a small cluster of homes, the familiar orange glow of porch lights like a relief from the endless black. They didn't stop until they were safely inside Emily's house, locking every door and window. "Maybe it was just some kids playing a prank," Josh said shakily. Emily didn't reply. She couldn't shake the feeling that the figures were still out there, just beyond the edge of vision. That night, she lay awake, listening to the house creak and groan, convinced she could hear whispering just outside the walls. The next morning, Emily tried to brush it off. The events seemed surreal in daylight, but her unease didn't fade. She noticed scratches on the car door, deep, jagged, like claws had torn through the metal. Josh saw them too, and they couldn't explain them. There were no signs of a tree branch or any normal cause. They decided to investigate the area where the engine died, hoping to rationalize what had happened. When they returned to Mill Road, the area was empty, quiet in a way that made Emily's stomach churn. There was no sign of the figures, the broken branches, or any disturbance at all, only the faint indentation of the car tires on the side of the road. But when Emily peered into the tree line, she thought she saw a face, elongated, pale, and impossible, vanishing between the trees before she could blink. Over the next few weeks, both Emily and Josh noticed small, unexplainable changes in their surroundings. Objects shifted slightly in their house, doors would be found ajar, even though they remembered locking them, and at night, there were occasional glimpses of movement outside windows. They chalked it up to stress at first, but the feeling of being watched became constant. One night, Emily awoke to the sound of breathing in her room. It was shallow, slow, and not her own. She froze, straining to see in the darkness. A shadow moved across the wall, tall and impossibly thin, and the whispering started again, low, guttural, just outside comprehension. She wanted to scream, but found her voice trapped. The shadow lingered, stretching along the wall, then receded toward the window. When Josh woke to her shaking, she pointed to the corner of the room. The figure was gone, but the unease lingered like a stain. They tried to leave town, hoping distance would sever whatever had latched onto them, but the feeling followed. Emily reported seeing figures along the highway just beyond headlights, moving in ways that defied logic. They noticed the whispering sometimes seeped into their dreams, turning them restless and paranoid. Friends began to notice the change. The way Emily flinched at shadows, the way Josh avoided certain streets. One night, a month after the Mill Road incident, Emily and Josh were driving home late. The road was empty, but the air felt thick, suffocating. A figure appeared in the middle of the lane, impossibly tall, its limbs bending backwards. Josh swerved violently, tires skidding. The figure didn't move aside, it simply stared with hollow, glowing eyes. Then, as if in unison, dozens more figures emerged from the trees surrounding the car. The whispering was deafening now, a chorus of impossibility urging them toward panic. Josh floored the gas, weaving between the figures, but it became clear they weren't trying to avoid the car. They moved in ways that made no sense, appearing closer with every blink, despite the speed. Emily could see the eyes now, dozens of glowing eyes, all focused, unrelenting. The whispering became words, broken but discernible. Join us. Forever. The car burst through the last line of trees, leaving the figures behind, but Emily knew it wouldn't end. They had crossed into something that existed just beyond reality, something patient and intelligent. She looked in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of a face pressed against the glass of the back window. Pale, elongated, impossible. Then it vanished. They reached home again, hearts racing, limbs trembling. Emily tried to sleep, but the shadows in her room grew longer, stretching in impossible angles. At every window, she swore she saw shapes watching. When she closed her eyes, the whispering invaded her mind, a constant lullaby of fear. Emily and Josh began to notice subtle signs of intrusion, footprints in the dirt outside their windows that led nowhere, scratches on walls and objects disappearing, only to reappear in grotesque arrangements. It was as though whatever had followed them from Mill Road was learning, evolving, waiting. One night, Emily woke to the feeling of being lifted from her bed. She opened her eyes to find herself suspended in darkness, the room impossible in perspective, stretching infinitely. Figures surrounded her, their bodies bending and twisting like nightmarish marionettes. They whispered her name in unison, a sound that pressed into her skull. She screamed. Josh ran to her side, but when he touched her hand, it passed through her like water. The figures retreated, but the effect lingered. Emily collapsed, trembling, convinced she had glimpsed another dimension, one crawling with intent, patient, inhuman. Weeks turned into months. They tried therapy, rational explanations, even relocating, but Emily knew it wasn't escapable. Whatever had attached itself that night on Mill Road existed outside the ordinary, indifferent to human comprehension. They lived in a perpetual state of observation, the whispering now a permanent undercurrent in their lives. Emily stopped sleeping fully. Shadows moved when her back was turned. Figures lurked just beyond her peripheral vision. Josh tried to protect her, but even he began to see them, tall, thin, whispering in the corners of the night. Friends stopped visiting. They didn't believe, couldn't understand. And Mill Road, the road still existed, empty by day, cursed by night, waiting for the next car foolish enough to take its shortcut. Years later, Emily would recount these events to no one because she knew no one would understand. The figures had followed her, had changed her perception, had shifted the very fabric of the nights she lived through. She would wake in the middle of the night, whispering at the walls, tracing the impossible shadows, and she would know in her heart that the trees of Mill Road were patient and that they would never, ever forget. Story the end. The cicadas had been screaming all evening, the kind of shrill, electric cry that rattles in your ears and seems to come from everywhere at once. I'd heard them all my life growing up in the rural stretches of southern Illinois, but that night they sounded different, higher, strained, as if something was tightening invisible fingers around their tiny bodies. I didn't know yet that the night would end with me running barefoot through cornfields, bleeding, shaking, and certain that something old and hungry had crawled out of the dark to follow me. Earlier that afternoon, I'd returned home for the first time in almost 10 years. My father's sudden death dragged me back, though he and I hadn't spoken since I was 19. Our argument from that year still lingered in the halls of the house like stale smoke. But death erases a lot of resentment, or at least it forces you to stand in the same room with it. I pulled into the gravel drive and stared at the old farmhouse, still sagging under the same faded blue paint, the porch still tilted like a crooked grin. Everything looked frozen in time. Only the cornfields were different, taller, denser, so thick they looked like walls rising around the property. Inside, the familiar smell of dust and cedar hit me hard. Memories stirred that I didn't want to revisit. There'd been strange things in my childhood I'd pushed down deep. Sounds under the floorboards, shadows that stretched too far, nights when the whole house seemed to hold its breath. And always, the cornfields rustling with no wind at all. I'd convinced myself it had been childish imagination. But when I stepped inside the house, something tightened in my gut, like a hand clenching around it. I spent a few hours sorting through boxes and paperwork, and the sun began to dip low. I'd planned to sleep in a motel, but exhaustion and frustration pinned me down. The house didn't feel welcoming, but it felt empty, and that was somehow worse. Still, I told myself I could handle one night. By dusk, I'd eaten a stale sandwich from a cooler and sat at the kitchen table flipping through old photo albums. In every picture from my childhood, I noticed the same thing. I was smiling, my mother was smiling, but my father always looked toward the fields. Always. Even in the photos taken indoors, his eyes drifted toward a window, like he was waiting for something to come back. My skin prickled. I shut the album. Outside, the cicadas' screams grew louder. At full dark, the porch light began to flicker. I didn't think much of it, old wiring, but around 9, it went out completely. The house dropped into shadow except for the dull glow of the lamp in the living room. That was when I heard it, a soft, deliberate scrape along the side of the house, like fingertips dragging across the wood. I froze. The cicadas abruptly went silent, as if someone had pressed a massive mute button in the sky. The sudden quiet rang my ears. Another scrape, longer this time. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was probably raccoons. Maybe a branch rubbing against the siding. Something normal, explainable, but the sound was too precise, too slow. I stood and went to the front door, cracking it open just enough to peer into the darkness. The cornfields swayed gently under the moonlight, but there was no wind. The air was completely still. Something about that unsettled me more than the scraping. I stepped outside onto the porch, trying to look brave, even though no one was there to see. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes. The humidity pressed heavy on my skin. I took a few steps onto the path leading to the yards, scanning for movement. Nothing. Then I heard breathing. Not my own, soft, wet, and too close. I spun, but no one was there. Nothing visible, at least. A chill slid down my spine. I backed toward the porch, reached for the doorknob, and the breathing stopped. It didn't fade. It didn't shift away. It stopped instantly, unnaturally. Something in me screamed that I needed to get inside. I pushed the door open and stepped in. Before I could close it, a low whisper drifted from the yard. Danny, my childhood nickname. A cold wave went through me so hard I nearly dropped to my knees. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I ran to the living room and grabbed the fireplace poker, clutching it so tight my knuckles went white. I didn't dare move for several minutes. The whisper hadn't been the wind. It hadn't been an animal. It had sounded exactly like my father's voice, but he was dead. I eventually forced myself to breathe again. I told myself I was exhausted, stressed, overwhelmed. Grief does strange things to the mind. I was hearing what I feared, not what was real. To distract myself, I searched the house for old paperwork I needed for the estate. My father's bedroom was last on my list, a place I'd avoided out of habit. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The room smelled like stale coffee and old sweat. The bed was unmade. Papers covered the nightstand, and on the floor near the closet lay a stack of notebooks. Dozens of them. I knelt and picked up the top one. The cover was smudged and soft from handling. When I opened it, I saw pages filled with my father's messy handwriting. At first, the entries looked like simple journal notes. But then I reached pages where the writing grew frantic, the ink darker, the words pressed deeper into the paper. It followed me again tonight. Saw it move between the rows. It knows where the house is weakest. Danny says he hears it too. I know he does. He tries to pretend he doesn't, but I see how he freezes at night. It wants him. It always did. My chest tightened. I read on. It changes shape. It mimics voices. It uses the tall stalks to hide its limbs. Too many limbs. I tried to trap it once, but it slipped through the earth like water. It grows bolder when the nights are hottest. I think it feeds on fear. It likes when we remember it. A sudden thud came from the hallway. I snapped my head toward the sound. The floor creaked again, slow, deliberate pressure on the old boards. Something was walking. I closed the notebook quietly, placed it on the floor, and gripped the fireplace poker again. My breath came shallow. I waited. Another step, then another. Whatever was in the hallway was moving carefully, like it wanted me to hear just enough. I edged toward the bedroom door, every muscle tight. The house was old, so sounds carried. I told myself maybe it was settling, or an animal had gotten in through the cellar. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I'd felt it outside, had heard its whisper. When I reached the door, I pressed my ear against it. Silence. I slowly opened it. The hallway was empty, but the air felt charged, heavy, and wrong, like someone had just been there. Shadows stretched along the walls in ways they never had when I was a kid, reaching farther than the lamp should have allowed. I stepped into the hall. Something skittered down the far end, fast. I jumped back, heart pounding, holding the poker out like a sword. I saw a flick of movement, but it disappeared before I could make myself to walk toward the living room. Halfway there, I heard a soft thump from the front door. Then another. Not knocks, presses like something was pushing against it with the side of its body. I stepped back. The door handle twitched once and then stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The cicadas outside had gone completely, unnaturally silent again. Then a voice, low and familiar, seeped through the wood. "Danny, open the door. It's your father." It sounded almost perfect, but the rhythm was wrong. Too slow, like each word was chosen by someone trying to remember how humans spoke. I didn't move. The voice came again, softer. "Son, please, it's cold out here." My hands trembled. "You're not him." Silence. Then a laugh. Not loud, not manic, just a soft, pleased chuckle like it had been waiting for me to say that. The doorframe shuddered. A long, dragging scrape ran up the wood. I stumbled backward, gripping the poker. The creature or thing outside pressed harder. The hinges groaned. The locks strained. I ran to the back of the house, fumbling for my phone, but it had no signal, not even a flicker. I turned on all the lights, but they flickered, dimmed, and died, leaving me in a house lit only by the faint glow of the moon sneaking through the windows. The back window above the sink rattled. I turned just in time to see a shape slide past it. Not a shadow, something big with limbs too long to be a person's. I ducked under the counter, stomach twisting. The window rattled again, harder, like something was testing it. A whisper slid through the glass. "Danny, let me in. So tired." I covered my ears, but the voice slithered inside anyway, like it found a way past my hands. I bolted from the kitchen, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. The house felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing inward. I remembered the notebooks. Maybe they had answers. Maybe my father hadn't been crazy. Back in his bedroom, I grabbed as many notebooks as I could carry and dumped them onto the bed. I flipped through entry after entry, searching for something to explain what was happening. Halfway through the 6th notebook, I found a page where the writing had grown jagged, shaky. It comes back every harvest season. Every year, the fields grow thicker, taller, like it's feeding the land or the land is feeding it. It wants the house empty. It wants us alone. It always watches Danny the closest. I hear it whisper to him at night. He pretends he's asleep, but I know he hears it. A sudden thump shook the entire house. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then another thump, closer, heavier. The thumps became footsteps inside the house, but I hadn't heard a window break. The doors were still shut. I backed toward the far corner of the room. Something dragged itself down the hallway, slow and scraping like nails on wood. My breathing choked down a cry. A shadow stretched across the doorway, high and thin, so thin it didn't look like a human silhouette. Then something stepped forward. I saw its hand first, or what tried to look like a hand. The fingers were too many, bending backward, sideways, unnaturally, as if the creature was still learning how to wear a human shape. The skin was stretched tight, almost translucent. It whispered my name again. I swung the poker as it lunged. The metal connected with a sickening crunch. The creature stumbled back, and I sprinted past it, feeling its 2 long fingers graze my shirt. I bolted down the hallway as the creature let out a soft, amused sigh, as if this was a game. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter, yanked the back door open, and ran into the night. The cornfields loomed tall, towering over me. The rows were dark tunnels. I didn't want to run into them, but staying in the open felt worse. I heard the creature's limbs scraping along the porch behind me. I plunged into the corn. The stalks slapped against my face and arms, cutting my skin. The earth was soft, uneven. My breath tore out of me in harsh gasps. The darkness inside the field was suffocating. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every rustle sounded alive. Behind me, something slid into the rows. Not loudly, not clumsily, with purpose. I ran faster, heart pounding, lungs burning. The field seemed endless. I tripped over roots, gashed my knee, kept running. At one point, I thought I'd lost it. The night grew quiet, except for my own frantic breathing. Then, to my left, a soft voice whispered from between the stalks. "Danny, don't run. You know I'll find you." I twisted away, deeper into the field, sobbing. My father's voice should never have sounded so calm, so patient, coming from something that wasn't him. I broke through a clearing where the corn had been flattened in a rough, circular pattern. The center of the circle was burned black, as if lightning had struck, but the burn marks formed a symbol I didn't recognize, carved into the soil like it had been drawn by claws. My stomach lurched. A shadow spilled into the clearing behind me. The creature rose taller than before, unfolding itself like a nightmare blooming open. Its body stretched too high, its limbs bending like wet rope. Its face flickered, first my father's, then my own, then something else entirely, something gaunt and impossible, all teeth and darkness. "You left me alone," it said in a voice that was not human, layered and echoing. "You left him alone, and I waited." I stumbled back, slipping in the dirt. My hands found a heavy stone. Without thinking, I hurled it. The rock struck its face, its shifting face, and the creature recoiled, shrieking. A sound so sharp it felt like knives slicing my ears. I ran again. Branches and stalks whipped me. My breath tasted like blood. I burst out of the cornfield onto the gravel road, the same road I'd driven earlier. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran until the farmhouse lights, or what remained of them, were distant specks. I kept going, barefoot now after losing my shoes in the field, running toward the faint glow of the nearest neighbor's house half a mile away. Behind me, in the far darkness, I heard the creature's whisper one last time. Soft, loving, hungry. "I'm not done with you, Danny." By the time I reached the neighbor's porch and collapsed, screaming for help, the night was silent again. Completely silent. No cicadas, no wind, no footsteps. Just the cold, watching dark of the fields behind me. The sheriff found the farmhouse door ripped open. Deep gouges ran along the walls. My father's notebooks were scattered everywhere. They told me it was probably a coyote, maybe a bobcat, maybe stress, maybe exhaustion, but none of them stepped into the cornfields while the sun set. I didn't either. I haven't gone back since, not once. But sometimes in the dead of night, no matter where I am, I swear I can hear it whisper from just beyond the edge of the shadows. My name. Slow, patient, promising. Danny, story the